IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, Sunday night. So y'all know what I've been doing all day today. I have been going through film, been breaking down the Notre Dame game, and now I am ready to join you all to talk about the game. We're going to go talk about the keys to victory and revisit those and see how Notre Dame performed in those areas in relation to the role that each one played in the win. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to also spend a little bit of time here at the beginning, just giving my overall impression of the game. Now that we're 24 hours post game, had a chance to look at the film, and then I'll just kind of just wrap things up a little bit at the end, and just kind of have sort of a let's look forward type of conversation when we when we start thinking about what's next for Notre Dame. And then I may do like a small little mini Q&A at the end of the show. So if you guys want to get in some questions that you have about this game, primarily I want to focus on this game. Go ahead and get those in. And if I see them, I'll bring them up at the end of the show. So hope you all are ready. Hope you all have had a great Sunday. Anyone in this area knows we got a little bit of rain today, a little bit of storms today, but it's overall been a pretty good day. And I'm ready to talk some Notre Dame football. So before we get going, want to have you all do me a favor, hit that like button before we get started, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you've not done so. Just a reminder for all of you, every show that we do, almost every show that we do is broken into smaller segments. So if you're someone who doesn't like the length of the shows, that's fine. You can watch what amount of this that you want to watch, but then also know that we also upload videos of these shows broken up into different segments. So you'll have a segment on each topic. And then also, that's on the YouTube channel, but also if you subscribe to our podcast, our Irish Breakdown Podcast, if you literally just go to Google and type in Irish Breakdown Podcast, it'll come up. You can subscribe to it. And every morning, our show from the previous day goes up every morning. We put it out about every hour. We put a new segment. So if we have a 3-hour show that's got 4 or 5 different segments, it'll be broken into 4 or 5 different shows. So for those of you who, for whatever reason, don't like the longer shows, there's your option to listen to the same content, but broken into smaller pieces. So, and then you can pick which topics interest you the most, and you can watch those. So definitely check those out as well. And just lots of different ways to absorb the Irish Breakdown content. So at the beginning, I want to go over just the game a little bit and just share some of my impressions of the game now that I've had a chance to kind of take a day to relax and watch the film and dive into everything and just what my overall takeaways were from the game and just kind of a big picture one. It is fascinating to think about how such a different direction Notre Dame and Stanford have gone really since 2018. When you were looking at that rivalry, that Notre Dame-Stanford rivalry in 2018, you had a situation where Stanford had really controlled the rivalry for several years. Beginning in 2009, Stanford had won 7 out of 10 games coming out of that 2018 season. Notre Dame had won in 2012, 2014 on last second place. 2018 was that first game that Notre Dame really took it to Stanford. They had lost 3 in a row, 4 out of 5, and it began really just a kind of a complete shift of the dynamic of the series. And Notre Dame won in 18 by 21. They won in 19 by 21. They won by 31 in 2021. They won by 33 last year. They won by 42 this weekend. And then right in the middle of that's that weird 2022 game where Notre Dame lost by 2. But it's just, I won't say it's sad because it was never a rivalry that I cared a ton about as far as long term, but those are some very competitive rivalries, and they're very different places now. And this game made it so obvious that when you watch the Stanford offensive line and you watch their tight ends, and I mean, they're almost non-existent. Their tight end play is almost non-existent. Their quarterback play is so different than it was. You don't have the same front 7 players. Their linebackers are smart veteran kids, but they're not like the Shane Scott type of guys, but the Bobby Okereke players like that. And Notre Dame is just so far outpaced Stanford in a lot of different ways. And they just went out and just were able to just sort of dominate them, and so it really is kind of interesting to see how this team performed against them. And I'll be honest with you, I actually feel a little bit better about the game now than I did coming through, because I'll be honest with you guys, when I broke down the game, this is a very good performance by Notre Dame. I mean, there's no way around it. Notre Dame had 24 first downs to Stanford's 14. Notre Dame had 229 rushing yards, 5.9 yards per attempt. Stanford had 113 rushing yards, 2.8 yards per attempt. Notre Dame had 248 passing yards, 9.2 yards per attempt, 13.8 yards per completion. Stanford had 87 passing yards, 10 of 18 passing, 4.8 per attempt, 8.7 per completion. Notre Dame had 477 yards of offense at 7.2 yards per play. Stanford had 200 yards even on offense, 3.4 yards per play. Notre Dame had more rushing yards than Stanford had total yards, rushing, passing combined, total yards. Notre Dame also had more passing yards than Stanford had total yards in this game. And it was really a dominant performance. And when you break down the game, you see it. I mean, Notre Dame dominated on first down. They dominated on third down. You know, the Irish were over 50% on third down. Stanford was only 4 of 12, 33%. Notre Dame was a perfect 3 for 3 on fourth down. Stanford was only 1 of 4. Notre Dame had 6 touchdowns. They had 6 scores on 7 red zone attempts. The only time that Notre Dame did not score in a red zone trip was the last drive of the game, where the game literally ended. And Stanford went 1 of 1 in red zone trips. And it was just overall just a really dominant performance from Notre Dame in every facet of the game. But when you break the film down, what I saw was a very good performance, but not an elite performance. And I was honestly expecting this to be an even sharper game than it was. I was expected to be a more dominant game than it was. I was expecting to pop on the film and be like, oh man, like, you know, this guy's going to grade out super high. This guy's going to grade out super high. And when I mean dominant, I just mean from an execution standpoint, just looking at the game and saying like, boy, I don't know how much better it can get at this point in time. I mean, those are the things I look at and say, man, I was expecting that to be my takeaway from the game. And it really wasn't. And that's actually a good thing, because when you look at this performance, and like I said, the offense was really good on Saturday, but I watched the game and I'm like, there's a lot that they can keep doing better. There's a lot of things they can do to become an even better football team. There are things offensively that they took some big steps on Saturday, but there's a lot of simple stuff that they can still clean up. Defensively, there were still some times when they weren't where they needed to be and had some bad fits, and we'll dive into that. But you still saw a dominant performance, and the reason for that is because the mistakes that they're making now that can and still need to be cleaned up are much more, they're less damaging mistakes than what we've seen. And I think after the second series on offense, you know, they had a couple bad sacks, couple bad pressures, I should say, early in the game. But I felt like they settled down. So it was like, okay, you know, the receiver not running this route the way that he needed to, the quarterback getting this ball out just a bit too late. You know, this pressure every now and then kind of coming through. You know, this play right here was, you know, it's close, but you want this ball here instead of there. Same thing defensively. It's like, okay, you got to clean up some tackling early in the game. You had a couple misfits in there. You had a couple plays where you turned the tight end loose on an over route. Fortunately, Stanford only hurt you on it once. You know, a couple times where maybe you were a little bit too aggressive at corner and you gave up a double move, but Stanford couldn't get to it. You know, they're just some things that are more normal, not so much, you know, crushing, I guess is a way of putting it, where you're just like, man, I don't know if they can get better at this. And so when I look at this game and I come out of it and I'm actually kind of grading down the performance a little bit, and then you look at some of the different things that they didn't do well execution wise, it actually makes me feel even more encouraged about the performance from Notre Dame. Because there is so much more room for them to continue to improve. There is so much more room for them to continue to do some of these smaller things. And you may not even notice some of the improvements and you know, if they start to make some of these, because they were so dominant. But the reality is there's a couple times. So here's how, when I'm grading film after the game, here's kind of how look at it so you guys understand. There's obviously like, okay, did you do the job against the opponent in front of you? Did you do the job that you needed to do to beat Stanford? And in this particular example. And then the other one is, okay, will this beat some of the better teams on the schedule? Is this going to be good enough to beat, Georgia Tech next week? Is this going to be good enough to beat, USC? Is this going to be good enough to get into the playoff and win your first round game? Is this going to be good enough to, if you get to the quarterfinals and you have to play a Big Ten or an SEC school, is it going to be good enough to beat those teams? And that's where when I look at it, I say I graded it down a little bit because there are still areas where you've got to clean it up to where you say, okay, well, you were late reacting to that jet sweep and you're athletic enough to eat that up against Stanford, but, you play Oregon or you play Ohio State or you play Texas, that guy might be able to get that edge on you. Hey, you were reacted poorly to this double move. The guy beat you down the field, cornerback, but your pressure got to him, the quarterback, and he couldn't get the throw off. Couldn't see it. Okay, well, what if you're playing an offensive line that's better than the Stanford offensive line and their quarterback has more time and is a more natural passer? So I look at it that way. And when I looked at it that way, I said, I tell you what, there's a lot of things that they can still clean up. And this football team is getting better, but it was more of the normal game-to-game improvements that you need to make. And that's what's way different about this game compared to early in the season where there were just these dramatic, like, God, the quarterback can't even read the defense. The offensive line is just completely getting manhandled by people they shouldn't be getting manhandled by. The receivers are playing with no urgency. The defense is just not tackling worth a darn. The defense has got this inconsistent effort thing going on. There were all these sort of big picture concerning things that I don't know if they weren't givens that they can be fixed, right? And so those are different things that I looked at and said, okay, those things now have not been an issue for 2 straight games. For 2 straight games, now it's just clean up some of this execution stuff, clean up some of this technical stuff. And when I look at it that way, I actually kind of come at it. It may sound like I'm being critical, and I want you to understand where my head and my heart is on this one. It really isn't. Because it's actually, from a coaching standpoint, it's actually a good thing because this was an absolutely dominant performance. But it wasn't necessarily like a game performance. This was more like, a B-plus performance for Notre Dame. Think about that. But that also is kind of why you get a little bit, or at least why I get a little bit fired up about this team. Because when I look at it, I say, boy, we have still not seen that A performance game yet. And I don't even know that Purdue was that, because Purdue was a game where it's like they were just so bad in that game. And yeah, Notre Dame did some really good things in that game, but they were just so bad in that game. And there were some just really simple stuff that Notre Dame didn't do right, but Purdue just wasn't good enough to do anything about it. And there was a little bit of that yesterday, but this is a much scrappier Stanford team than what Purdue is. It is a much scrappier football team. And so they were able to take advantage of some things early on. But when I see how this football team reacted to the slow start, which they have not done well, we talked about that last night. Don't need to rehash that again. When I look at some of the rust that you see from coming out of a bye week, and you say, boy, that's all easily correctable stuff, especially with a veteran football team. And those are things that had me kind of fired up about where this game is, because you see Riley Leonard's growth on Saturday, for example, looking at the offense, and you say, boy, he had a lot of growth, but there's still areas where they can get better. There was a particular play where Riley Leonard scrambled out of bounds on the 3rd down where he picks up the 1st down and he moves the chains, but you give me better pass pro there at left tackle. They're running a high-low. They ran a seam route so they had it was a 2-by-2 formation. They ran a seam route by the slot guy, a deep in cut by the outside, the Z. You had a cross out concept boundary. So I think it was the tight end ran a deep out cut, and then the X ran a crosser. Well, Riley Leonard's looking at it, and there's one linebacker, and that linebacker's getting ready to jump the crosser, or he's going to sink. He hadn't had to declare yet. And whatever he does, somebody's coming wide open. Either the dig route behind it or the crosser in front of it. And Riley gets to his drop and he wants to hit it, but then all of a sudden the left tackle gets smoked. And you're like, all right, you got to figure out a way to fix that. You got to be able to fix that because those are big plays, but those are sort of normal correctable things. Riley Leonard there's running a curl route with Jalen Sneed, Jaden Thomas. One of the concepts that Notre Dame ran on Saturday was essentially an old school curl flat. I was so happy to see it because you don't see it a ton, but Stanford was giving them that look. And Riley comes out of the break and he's just about a foot behind Jaden. And I thought it was a combination of Jaden just went a little bit too far inside and Riley threw it a little bit too far behind him. Those are things that can still get worked on. And boy, I tell you, that was stuff that kind of has me fired up because that's when you're as an offense, when those are your mistakes, that's when you're really close to clicking. And my thought coming out of the game was, and when I watched this film was, is this the best it can be? Is this the best this football team can be? With this dominant performance. And okay, all right. It's not because, you had the late start and you had the penalty and the turnover. Okay, it's not the best it can be. All right, let me look at it this way. Once they got past that, is this the best this football team can be? And when I broke down the film, I kind of had that in mind. And you think about those things when you're playing a team that you just absolutely annihilate. And the answer is no. This team is not even close to, well, I should say that. That's not. They're a lot closer, but they're not there yet to really being that team that's ready to really hit its stride. They have yet to play that game where you're like, okay, that's what Notre Dame can be. And you're never that week after week after week, but you do get to a point in time where you say, hey, listen, we're there, and now we're kind of going like this. And then, you were going like this down here, then you kind of move up a little bit. And, because you're always going to be a little bit up and down from week to week. You're never the same exact team. But what's your point where you're slightly up, slightly down? Notre Dame is kind of getting up to here, and there's room to still get up to there. And that's where this football team's got to get to. But Saturday was the first time that I felt like the offense was at a point where I felt they are close now to taking off. The question is going to be, is it because of how Stanford is on defense? Or is it the offense is really getting there? Or is it a little bit of both? And that's what we're going to have to find out as we move forward. And as I said, this was, in my opinion, Notre Dame's best performance of the season in relation to higher level of execution than what we've seen in recent weeks, or really all season. Kind of consistency for the most part from what we've seen in recent games. And it was one where you felt like this was the closest they were to, okay, this team is really on the verge of taking off. Even more impressive than the A&M win. Not impressive relative to the competition, but relative simply to the standpoint of how did Notre Dame play? How did Notre Dame perform? Are they close to their peak? And if I were to rank the performances right now, I'd go Stanford 1, I'd go A&M 2, I would go Louisville 3, I'd go Purdue 3, Louisville 4, Miami of Ohio 5, Northern Illinois 6 is how I would rank the performances from what we've seen so far. So I was very encouraged to come out of this game feeling like they're inching closer and closer. And the final reason why that encourages me, because this is now, in my opinion, 4 games in a row where you've seen some level of growth from this football team. And I know that it doesn't look like growth going from a 66-7 win over Purdue to a 28-3 win over Miami of Ohio, but it goes back to the video I broke down, where I broke down every single pass play from that game and put that on the premium board. And a lot of people watch it afterwards and are like, you know what? My opinion changed looking at the film that you can see, because I see how much closer they actually are than maybe what my impression was watching the game. And so then you have that game where it's like, okay, it's better. It's not there yet, but it's better. The Louisville game, you have the good start, and then you kind of stagnate, and then you put them away late. There was obviously growth. There was improvement. You come out of the bye week. We said, okay, what is this team going to be? And for at least the first game out of the bye, you saw what I believe to be the biggest jump yet for this football team on offense. And we saw the defense answer some very important questions about who are you going to be without the players that are no longer part of your football team. And step one to answering that was a very impressive performance. And I feel like Notre Dame, if they can continue and build on this now, going into Georgia Tech, going into Navy, because these next 2 weeks are going to be very challenging football games for Notre Dame. Georgia Tech's 5-2, Navy's, I believe, 5-0. I believe Navy was off this weekend, so they are 5-0. And so your next two opponents are 10-2. And you're going to have to be prepared to go out there and play at a very high level in this matchup. So you're getting a Georgia Tech team that is coming off of a tough road win over North Carolina. They also beat a quality Duke team the weekend before that, had a competitive battle with Louisville, blew out VMI, blew out Georgia State, who, by the way, beat Vanderbilt. And then, of course, the early season win over Florida State. So it was a great showing to make me feel like this team is getting there. And the next step is going to be, okay, you had a list like this of things to work on. Now the list is kind of like this of things to work on. And if you can get the list down to here, this team's going to be really, really, really hard to beat. And that was an exciting thing that I got out of breaking down the film of this football game. So just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up, I am a little under the weather today. No excuses, pod like a champion, right? So I'm not making an excuse. I'm just letting you guys know there will be times I may need to take like a little 30-second break just to kind of have some tea and get that back. But we're going to be rocking and rolling, and I'm excited about this. So make sure that you are understanding of that. But also a reminder before I get to the next segment and do keys to victory that if there are some questions that you want me to answer about this game, there was a question about the rankings that I'm going to go ahead and take up. I want to try to focus on this game or the rankings of this game. Then that's kind of where we focus on. And so get those in there. Just do the MB, and I'll try to get to a few of those questions here at the end about this game. So just want to give you guys a heads up on that. All right, it's time to jump into our the upon further review aspect where we dive into the keys to victory, and these are the keys to victory that I had that I came up with, that I felt like studying the opponent, studying Notre Dame, seeing what needed to be done, seeing how, look, this is who Notre Dame is, this is what this team is, and this is what Notre Dame needs to do to have success against this opposing football team. And we had 5 for the offense in this game, and we're going to talk about, what we saw from this football team and how do they execute in those areas. And then we'll do defense next. But let's begin with the offense. And you guys can see this article. It can be found if you go to irishbreakdown.com. That's where all of our content is. By the way, if you signed up for Irish Breakdown through Sports Illustrated, we are no longer with Sports Illustrated, so your membership to the board won't be renewed. And if you were only signing up for SI to get our stuff, then you don't need to do that anymore. Just to give people heads up on that. But key number 1 is the same key that it always is. It's start fast. And, this was an interesting one because I actually feel like I'm giving it I've been back and forth on this all day. I'm curious to get some of your thoughts. But when I look at what Notre Dame did in this game and I look at the fast start, I give it a check. And here's why I give it a check, because it was not a perfect start to the game. I mean, your first drive of the game, you've got the ball at the 49-yard line going in. Your quarterback runs it down to the 30. It's going to be first down. You're knocking on the door of the red zone, but a holding penalty calls you back and you end up punting. And then Stanford goes down and scores. But Notre Dame, I thought, answered pretty well to that. They went on a 12-play, 75-yard touchdown drive to tie the game. Defense makes that big 4th down stop near midfield. Offense capitalizes with a 7-play, 52-yard drive, and then they fumble on their next possession. So you're like, okay, well, why are you giving them a check? That a fumble? Yeah, it was bad. But then Notre Dame's very next possession, which was the final possession of the first half, the defense makes a stop. They get the ball. They go 9 plays, 56 yards, and punch it into the end zone, and converted a 4th down along the way. And so when I look at it, it's not a great fast start, but I do think that I'm giving them a check for the fast start because look, you scored on 2 of your first 3 possessions. Notre Dame scored on 2 of their first 3 possessions against Purdue, and we gave them a check, right? You didn't score on your first 3 like you did Louisville, but the difference between Louisville in this game is you kept building on it. And so I am going to give them a check. It's if you said, okay, is it closer to check plus or check minus? I say probably check minus, because against better teams, you can't have those drive-killing penalties. Against better teams, you can't have those fumbles. You can't have those type of mistakes. You've got to be able to be more effective getting in there. But I'm giving them a check for that, because I do think when you score on 2 of your first 3 possessions, when you answer your defense making a 4th down stop with a touchdown, when your defense gives up a touchdown and you counter with a touchdown, you get a chance to put that team away in the first half. I mean, if we go into halftime and it's 14-7 compared to 21-7 because Notre Dame doesn't convert that 4th down late in the second quarter, I mean, what are we talking about? This is a whole different deal. I mean, if you look at that final drive, Notre Dame starts with the ball with 3:48 left at their own 44-yard line. They get all the way down to the Stanford 15 before they get to a 3rd down. Riley Leonard completes a pass to Jaden Thomas, gets 8 yards, getting to a 4th and 1. Notre Dame goes for it. So instead of trying to go up 17-7 and make it a 2-possession game, Marcus Freeman was aggressive, and I liked the call. He went for it on 4th down. You didn't actually block it really well. Jeremiah Love just put his shoulder down and just smacked the guy and moved the chains. And then, of course, the next play, Riley Leonard throws a touchdown pass to Chris Mitchell. So I'm giving him a check. I feel like when it comes to starting fast, it wasn't perfect, but it was definitely a good start that allowed Notre Dame to pull away. And then you make one stop in the second half and punch that turnover in, and all of a sudden the ball game is over. And a lot of that had to do with how the Notre Dame offense started. And I also think, too, Notre Dame's defense was on its heels a little bit early in that game with some of the stuff that Stanford was doing, and I'll talk a little bit about it later. And after Stanford scored, not only did Notre Dame counter with a score of their own, but they went 12 plays and 75 yards. It took over 5 minutes off the clock. That's a lot of time for Al Golden and that defensive staff to sit down and say, okay, what are we seeing? To look at the film, to talk to the defenders, to kind of go through the different aspects of what was going on and make some corrections. And so I felt like that was a really important drive. And then, of course, Notre Dame makes the 4th down stop, and then they went on a 7-play, 52-yard drive that took over 3 minutes off the clock. So after that 1st down drive, Notre Dame had one stop and then over almost 9 minutes of game time where they didn't have to be on the field but for one drive. And I felt that was important too. Not only did you just get scores, but you got a couple at least one methodical score that gave your defense a chance to sort of regroup and really help your football team. So I was very pleased with that. So I'm going to give them a check in that regard. Number 2, protect the quarterback. Again, this is a check. It was not a great start to the game. Obviously Anthony Knapp has the early hold on that same drive. He gives up another pressure. On the very next drive, he gives up another pressure that forces Riley Leonard to scramble. I did feel like he and the rest of the offensive line, for the most part, settled in a little bit after that. When you look at the game and you look at Pro Football Focus numbers, they have the offensive line as only having given up 5 pressures the whole game. Now, that's still not great, because the reality is that they didn't throw the ball down the field a ton, and they did use some max protection type situations. But you had 2 pressures allowed by your center, and you had 2 pressures allowed by your left tackle, the 2 places you just don't want that to have happen. And then you had a pressure that was allowed by your second-team offensive line, gave up a pressure as well. So you only had 4 with the first-team offensive line. When I look at it, obviously it's got to get better. You've got to there's still plenty of room to get better, and you have to look at it in context, which is this is a Stanford team that's not good at rushing the quarterback. And so the question that I don't know that we have the answer to is, was this true growth, or is this a situation where they just kind of dominated a team that's not good at rushing the quarterback? Well, it's a little bit of both, to be completely honest with you, but the grade is relative to what they did against Stanford. And what they did against Stanford, in my opinion, was good enough to give Riley Leonard the early time to get comfortable, get into rhythm, and do a lot of damage to Stanford. So I give him a check, but it's a very lightly written check. I still have some questions and concerns about the couple positions, but here's the reason why ultimately I kind of swung towards check, not just the overall numbers, but I did see some growth from this line when it comes to handling the line games. You saw in this game a technical adjustment in this game. And let me kind of walk you guys through this. So in the recent games, and we talked about this got to get fixed. In recent games, when guys would in pass pro would slant across the face of the guards, Rocco Spindler, use him as an example because the play I'm thinking of in my head is one from Louisville and then one from yesterday. And what would happen is the guy would cross his face, and then Rocco would turn, and Pat Coogan would turn, and they would go with that slant. And then the looper would come around, and they would have their hips turned. And I've said, you guys have heard me say this a million times, once an offensive lineman gets his hips turned, he's in trouble. Yesterday, what we saw was when a guy would cross Rocco's face, he would step to it and give a punch, but he'd keep his shoulders square and his eyes open because he knew, okay, I'm passing this guy off to my tackle, or if my tackle can't take him and nobody comes, I then turn and ride him. And we saw Pat Coogan do that a couple times where he would kind of stick that wrong arm, protect that gap to your right, which is the direction the protection was going, get your eyes upfield, and then they'd bring those loopers around, and they were doing a much better job of stepping to those loopers. We saw them with they were doing the long stunts on the right side. They do the quick stunts on the left side. And we saw that with Sam Pendleton as well, where they did a much better job of keeping their shoulders square and communicating and coming off those blocks. So even though they played a quote-unquote bad pass rushing team, which they are, they did do a very good job, in my opinion, of improving the technical aspects of what Notre Dame was struggling with in the past. So that's a big positive to come out of the game. There's still some one-on-one blocks, like Pat Coogan got beat a couple times. One time he allowed a pressure in Riley's face. Riley still got the throw off, actually. I believe one of them was on the post throw to Bo Collins. But Pat let a guy kind of get up in him and rock him back, and he got off late to the quarterback. It wasn't terrible, but you just got to clean up a couple of those things, and you'll be okay. So I did feel like they made progress in that regard, and that was an example, and that's ultimately what caused me to say, let's give him a check for this performance. My third key in this game was find some pass game answers. And there were things that needed to be done from a quarterback read standpoint, a protection standpoint, getting different weapons involved standpoint. And I'm giving them a plus in this one. And this is relative to Stanford. There's still a lot of things to clean up, but it's relative to Stanford and then some of the improvements that I saw this team make in the game. And so when I look at some of the different aspects of it, so I've got my play-by-play breakdown, and the first thing you'll notice when you're breaking the game down is Notre Dame did a lot in the RPO game against Stanford, which was huge. And that's something that we have honestly just not seen a lot from Notre Dame. We haven't seen a ton of RPO. The stuff we've seen has been like real quick perimeter stuff. We haven't seen a group that's that's really dynamic in the RPO game. And it hasn't been incredibly effective in this game. Well, you're playing a Stanford run defense that likes to crash downhill. And so the first finding a pass game answer in this game was going to the RPOs, and it started early. It started early for Notre Dame in this game. And so when you look at the first couple drives of the game, Notre Dame ran a play action on the first drive, but the second drive, they threw 2 RPOs. One completed for 12 yards. The other one was incomplete, just a missed ball in the end zone. Then the next drive, they run a play action and another RPO for a touchdown. The next drive, they run an RPO on the first play of the game, or first play of the drive, goes for 16 yards. Guy fumbles. Next drive, they have an RPO that goes for 11. The drive ends with an RPO for a touchdown. So you saw a lot more of that RPO action and some screen game stuff that looked like it was built off the RPO action. And so that was part of it as well. But here's the other thing that is important. It's not just having RPO success. And in this game, Notre Dame went 6 of 7 on RPOs. So they completed 6, attempted 7 for 64 yards. So those are designed run plays where you're calling a run, and instead of it being a run, you pull it and you throw it. So that's very efficient, very effective stuff. Okay. The other part of this success, when you're looking at it, is it's not just about the success of the plays and you hit a couple of the same routes and you threw a route that they hadn't expected before, but it was also some variety. And these are the routes that Notre Dame hit on RPOs. They hit 3 glance routes. They hit one, two. They hit 3 glance routes through another that ended up actually getting caught by an offensive lineman. That was just a bad decision by Riley Leonard, to be honest with you, on that particular play. They threw a quick out cut to Chris Mitchell on an RPO, was incomplete, but they threw it. The RPO to Bo Collins was a hitch where Riley catches it and throws it outside for a 16-yard gain. And then they also threw a Y under route for a touchdown to in the, I think it was the third quarter, to Eli Raridan, which was also an RPO action. And then when you're effective with your run game and your RPO, you then say, okay, well, what are some other answers? Well, one thing we talked about in our breakdown of the game was Notre Dame has to do a better job of getting the ball to the perimeter. And then there's some things we'll talk about the run game wise, but there was also ways you got to get the ball out to the perimeter in the pass game. And of course, early on, they had a couple quick throws outside to Bo Collins, which we'll talk about. But you come out in the second series and you line up in a attached tight end alignment. Your tight end goes out in a quick boom motion, and you throw a little now screen that wasn't necessarily incredibly well blocked or well designed, but you got the ball to Chris Mitchell in space. He makes a guy miss early, and next thing you know, he picks up 11 yards on the play. And it was on a 2nd down and 12. So your first play of the drive does not start well. You're -2, 2-yard loss, 2nd and 12. And it's like, oh, here we go. And then you throw that little now screen. It's not perfectly designed. It was good timing, good ball, but it wasn't like, oh man, great call, great job. You had them perfectly schemed up, easy 11 yards. No, he had to make somebody miss. But this is the whole point we talk about all the time. Get your playmakers the ball in space and then let them go do something with it. And Chris Mitchell did that. Next thing you know, instead of it being 3rd and long because you went and got 4 or 5 yards, it's now 3rd and 1, and Notre Dame is able to convert it, and then that leads on to a touchdown drive. So that was another answer that I felt like Notre Dame found in the run game, or in the passing game, where they had more success. They had a play later in the game where they line up in basically a doubles formation, so 2-by-2 formation, nobody attached. They motion Jeremiah Love out to the right and throw him a little now screen. And that goes for 25 yards. Quick hitters behind the line of scrimmage, get the ball in the hands of your playmakers and let them go do something with it. And Jeremiah Love did that. So that was another answer that they found in the throwing game against Stanford. There's a couple other things that we saw against Stanford that I thought were positives. I talked about the curl flat concept that we saw. From a schematic standpoint, we saw them run a play for a big gain where they kind of set up a big play to Bo Collins, and it went for a 53-yard gain. But what I liked about it is Notre Dame had ran that play out of 21 personnel. And up to that point in the game, when Notre Dame had gone 21 personnel or even 12 personnel, they were a heavy run team. They had lined up and they had, said, hey, look, we're going to come out and we're going to run the ball out of this look. They were running this kind of this pin and pull concept. And out of the Twins looks, they were very much a heavy run game, heavy run look. So as I'm looking over early in the game, they ran Twins and ran a slot fade out of it, right? So they line up, you're getting one-on-ones, you take a shot downfield, ball just comes out a little bit late. You had an extra gather step by Riley Leonard. Next time you run it, you're in a run situation. Then you have a little quick sprint out throw on short yardage. Then you run the ball again, and then you run the ball again, and then you come out to it next time, and the look you're going to get. And so they come out, and it was this late. This is in the 3rd quarter, and they're in a 21 personnel Twins alignment, 2 backs in the backfield. They don't motion anybody out. They've got tight end on one side, 2 backs in the backfield, and they run play action. And Stanford bites on it hard. They run a stop route outside and then a post route from the slot. And you do a play action performance, you drop back, and you throw a bomb down the field. I actually thought that I felt like watching it live that Riley was late with the throw. When you go back and watch it on all 22, he actually was not late with the throw. I just don't think he wanted to miss. I think Sean nailed this yesterday. I just think he kind of threw it shorter because he was wide open and didn't want him to miss, didn't want to overthrow him, but he didn't get it out late. He got out of his play action, got to the top, gathered, and threw the football. He was accurate with it, and he hit the big play. So it was good to see that. That was just a different wrinkle we hadn't seen. This is something Notre Dame did against Stanford 2 years ago. It was very similar to the play that they scored a touchdown on with Tobias Merriweather back in 2022. Different defense, different team, but a very similar look. And so I like that. We saw some crossers on Saturday. I mentioned the play on third down where Riley had to scramble and picks up the first down with his legs. You've got a seam by number 2, a deep end by number 1 with a crosser and an out cut by number 2. Love that concept. We saw them run the play that they did against Louisville for a big gain, where they have a 3-by-1 formation with a tight end attached. They run a stop route outside and then 2 seams by 2 and 3 and then a backside out cut. It was there. Riley just threw it too far up the seam. He needs to get it out a little bit over the middle. So there were some even more opportunities there. But what I liked was, even though it wasn't perfect, there were some misses. You know, Riley late on one throw, misses another. Yeah, there was a couple receiver routes. Bo Collins drops a ball that I think got tipped. Going back and looking at it on a glance route, you know, there's some things like that, but you felt like they made some schematic adjustments in the game. They ran some play action. Which gives you the nice thing about play action, the way that Notre Dame ran it, like the play to Bo Collins, was a 2-man route. So they were max pro. So, hey, look, we want to take a shot. We think we can get them to bite down. And so we're going to get 7 guys in pass pro, right? Actually, 7 guys in pass. No, be 8 guys in pass pro. 8 guys in pass. So the 5 linemen, plus the tight end, plus both backs, and then boom, 8-man pass pro. Now you got your time to throw the ball down the field. So those were different things that I felt like Notre Dame did find some answers in this game. Quick game, RPOs, getting the ball down the field, being aggressive, trying to get some stuff over the middle of the field. I was impressed by that. We talked a lot about in the past also how Notre Dame's pass game is almost exclusively outside. They do very, very little over the middle of the field. Well, they threw 2 touchdown passes over the middle of the field. They threw a 53-yard post route over the middle of the field. They had another ball dropped over the middle of the field. They had a big conversion. I believe it was a 3rd down conversion over the middle of the field. You had Chris Mitchell catching a ball over the middle of the field. So they were much more willing to throw the ball over the middle of the field in this game, which I thought was encouraging. It's just another way that you have to say, hey, look, teams just can't come flying downhill to stop our running game the way that they have. And so all those things were there. I'm giving them a check plus in that one, not a total plus because you need to hit a couple of those throws, but a check plus in this game. I was very pleased with the changes that we saw Notre Dame make. And Riley Leonard was on pace for 300 yards in the game. And if Micah Gilbert doesn't drop a pass in the end zone, they're getting a lot closer to 300 yards, period, on the throw from Steve Angeli. So the pass game really was good. Now, you're playing against a very bad pass defense. Let's be honest about that. But we saw so that's where I say it wasn't like, oh, my gosh, the pass game has arrived. National championship, here we come. It wasn't that. It wasn't that. It was more about they made a big step. It wasn't just another, like against Purdue, they made some baby steps. Against Miami, they made some bigger baby steps, made some toddler steps. How about that? And then against Louisville, they definitely, I thought, made some strides early, but this was the first time I thought they made a big leap in the pass game. It's not completely there yet, but this was a very encouraging sign, and that's why I give the offense a check plus for that. Next key, move the chains effectively. I thought this was very important in this game. I thought Notre Dame did a really good job of this. Just very effective. I mean, first drive of the game, you get that possession going. End up getting stalled by a holding penalty, but Notre Dame gets into 3rd and 2, and they go out and complete a pass and move the chains with the run game. Then you get your next third down you don't get, and you have to punt. Next drive, you get into a 3rd and 1. Jadarian Price runs it for a first down. You get into a 3rd and 2. This time they threw the ball over to Jaden Greathouse over the middle. Great read by Riley Leonard. Really good route concept that Notre Dame ran. They ran a stop route by number 1, little middle option by number 2. They had a Y motion where he would started in 3-by-1, motions over to 2-by-2, runs a slide with the burst corner. Riley looks to the burst corner side, sees it, comes back to Jaden Greathouse in the middle. He gets a 19-yard gain, and you move the chains there, and that sets up your next touchdown, your touchdown drive on that there. Your next touchdown drive, you get the ball on 3rd and 7, and Riley scrambles for a first down. And the thing I liked about that play, that's the play I was talking about where they ran a concept where if Riley gets time to throw, he's either going to have a crossing route or a deep dig cut coming open, deep in cut coming open. He's that ball's getting that third down's getting converted, whether it's his scramble or him throwing the ball, as long as it would have been an accurate pass, because the scheme was open. But then Riley goes out and makes the play, and then they don't get another third down the rest of that drive. They don't face another third down until late in the first half. They get into a 3rd and 9 situation, and Riley hits Jaden Thomas on a quick outcut, and Jaden catches it, makes a guy miss, gets 9 yards. It gets into a 4th down and 1. They convert that 4th down and 1, and then get the ball into the end zone. So I thought that Notre Dame was very good in this game when it comes to moving the chains effectively. I thought it was a game where they had some big plays, but they didn't feast on big plays like we've seen in a lot of games. You had 24 first downs in the game, which ties for your second most of the season with Miami of Ohio, and behind only Purdue. They only had 11 against Louisville. You had 9 first downs thrown. You had 14 first downs rushing, and then 1 by penalty. Against Miami of Ohio, they had 24 first downs. 5 of those came by penalty. So it was a very balanced attack. And then, of course, when Notre Dame got in the red zone, they were able to get touchdowns and not field goals. So all of that plays into Notre Dame getting a plus, in my opinion, for this game when it comes to moving the ball effectively. And then the final piece is mix up the run game looks. And I'm giving them a check plus on this one as well. There's a couple things I'd still like to see from them run game-wise, but we definitely saw some variety. You guys remember last week, 2 weeks ago, when we were breaking down the game against Louisville, and it was literally inside zone, quarterback counter, inside zone, quarterback counter, inside zone, quarterback counter. That's it. Everything was downhill, downhill, downhill. And I felt like in this game, they did some things to really mix this up. And one of them, obviously you have the RPO as part of it, right? That's mixing up the run game looks. You see this hard run action, you're flying downhill. Well, one way to mix that up is to throw the RPO game off of it, and Notre Dame did that. That's step number 1. I think the little quick now screens outside is something that takes some of the pressure off of the run game. But they also had some different wrinkles, and they did some different things to go at them in this game. So they ran a lot of inside zone, which they're always going to do. And I thought Notre Dame had a lot of success thrown on the inside zone concept. So see 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 inside zone runs, and they went for 73 yards in the game. That includes is that correct? Hold on a second. Is that right? Yeah. So you had 13 carries for 73 yards. You also had 2 touchdown runs on inside zone. What I liked about that was one of them bounced out front side. The other one bounced up backside. It was a cutback. So you went 5.6 yards per attempt. They ran counters. They ran a 6-yard quarterback counter for a touchdown with Riley Leonard. And they ran another counter in the game where Stanford really jumped it, and it was a -2. They didn't run a lot of counter after that. Or I don't know if it was because of that, but they didn't run a lot of as much counter in this game because of how Stanford defended it. And they crash off the backside a lot. They ran 2 outside zone plays that went for 17 yards, were both efficient runs. And then what they also did in this game too is they put in like a little pin and pull wrinkle. And it wasn't an incredibly effective play, but I really felt like it messed with Stanford's eye discipline where, they were seeing this run, and then Notre Dame's outside zone and some of their inside zone runs ended up being really good off of this because of the way that Stanford was kind of seeing it. So what they were doing was essentially is they were running a pin and pull concept where they were bringing a front side lineman would wrap and kick or would pull and kick, and then the backside tackle would wrap around. And they did this out of I believe they did this out of pistol. Let me go look real quick. I believe this play was done out of pistol. Let me just give me a second. I'm going to go look here real quick at this particular play because I deleted the formations initially from this. So let me just get here. Give me 1 second, everybody. Let me get this breakdown. So let me go here. So let me look at this. So let's go. So they ran this out of pistol, 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 pistol. So they ran this out of pistol. So it's another example of them giving the defense a little bit of a different wrinkle. And just something that you ran split backfield, you had pistol looks. And what the pistol look did is it allowed the running back to get downhill, but it allowed it to time up. It took a little bit longer to develop. And so they were pinning and pulling. And there were some good chunk runs out of this, to be honest with you, that I was happy to see in this game. And so that was obviously a good part of what they did. Like I said, 4 runs for 21 yards. That's not like a incredibly, oh my gosh, they did so good there. But it was a very efficient run. You had 4 carries on it, 21 yards. 3 of your runs were efficient. And that's a good number. That's a very good number for that particular play. So I was happy to see that type of stuff. I really was. I thought that they did a pretty good job of mixing up those different wrinkles, mixing up those different looks, and giving Stanford something to think about. I still would like to see a little bit more just get to the perimeter, just a little bit more of a willingness to attack the perimeter with the run game quickly. That's just not something this staff does a whole lot of. You know, we saw Stanford try to do that with some different wrinkles. I'm not talking about the speed option stuff, just a little quick pitches, little quick hitters, some things like that where you're getting outside. But look, the way that they were running that double, that pin and pull concept, it was a run with the potential of bouncing. They ran 2 outside zone plays, which went for really good yards, 17 yards, 2 of them. So they did force Stanford with the now screens, with the came with motions, with the RPOs, with that pin and pull concept. With the way that they were lining up and giving them different backfield actions, they ran outside zone. I do felt like they had some really good mix-ups in the run game, and they were mix-ups that put Stanford in some tough binds. So overall, I really was pleased with what I saw from the Notre Dame offense when it comes to their keys to victory. I felt like they had a very good game plan. I thought Mike Denbrock did a really nice job of breaking down the film, getting comfortable with where his team was. You know, what are some things that need to be added to what we're doing offensively, looking at it from his standpoint? What are some things that we need to add to it? You know, what are some things that we're good at that we need to maybe emphasize a little bit more? What are some things we're not doing a good enough job at that we can need to add it? I'll be one to bet you a decent amount of money that Notre Dame spent a lot of time working on RPOs during the bye week, because they went from not running it a lot to running it a lot with a lot of variety. And Riley Leonard was throwing it with confidence. He did have the one big mistake. And again, you can't have those. He predetermined that a little bit and said, hey, I'm going to throw this RPO. And I thought he should have gone to the other side or handed the ball off. So that's just part of that evolution of getting cleaner and getting better, and saying, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. You're not going to be able to kind of get to it. And so some of that stuff is our ways to, if they're going to crash inside, we're going to pull it and get the ball outside. And they had a lot of success with that. So overall, I give the offense a check. I mean, I think, did I give them a minus in anything? I don't think I gave them a minus in anything, did I? But overall, very, very strong performance by Notre Dame offense. Certainly took a jump and executed their keys to victory at a very high level. And that was a big reason why you saw a team get 49 points. You saw a team go for 476 yards of offense. You saw a team go for over 7 yards of play and 7.2 yards per play. This was one of their best passing performances of the season statistically, not just on top of obviously of yards, which I believe was their second best performance. It's their best performance in yards by 32. It was their best performance from yards per attempt by almost a full point. It was the most touchdown passes they had in the game with 3. The previous high rating in quarterback rating was 164.4 against Purdue. They were at 162.14 against Louisville. They went 180.49 in this game. So that's obviously a positive as well. And It was the highest yards per catch rate they had this season. The highest before this was Purdue at 12. Other than that, they did not have a single game where they were over 10 yards per play on the receptions. They went 13.4 against Stanford. So good performance, can certainly room to get better, but it was a really, really important step for Notre Dame to make and to get their offense rolling a little bit, and hopefully it can be built on as they move forward. Let's turn to the Notre Dame defense. And, you know, this group I thought was really it's a really impressive group, and it's a very well-coached football team, and a group that you have to respect their grittiness, because when you think about this game, and I'm watching the game and I'm like, man, you know, one of my concerns coming out of the game was, you know, the edge pressure is not great. You know, like they got a lot of up the middle pressure, but man, the edge pressure wasn't great in this game. And Stanford doesn't have great tackles. And then you're thinking, but good Lord, they played this game without Boubacar Traore. They played this game without Jordan Patelho. You know, they didn't have Jason Onye in the game. You look at it and you're just like, man, it's like, well, they're overcoming quite a bit to be able to go out there and still have the performance that they did. Overall, I thought this was a strong performance from the Notre Dame offense. Obviously, you shut down Stanford in a way that none of their previous opponents had been able to shut them down, including including Clemson. Obviously, Clemson gave up 14 points to Stanford in their victory over the Cardinal. Virginia Tech called them 7 points. Those are their backup quarterbacks, so that's a little bit different. But your offensive production for the Cardinal, they had 200 yards of offense. Their lowest of the season was the week before against Virginia Tech with 258, which was obviously, as I said, done with their backup quarterback. The 3.39 yards per attempt was also their lowest output of the season. Their 113 rushing yards was their lowest output of the season. Their 2.8 yards per carry was their lowest output of the season. Their 87 passing yards was their lowest output of the season by 35. They even threw the ball for more yards last week against Virginia Tech without their starting quarterback. It was the first time all season they had failed to throw a touchdown pass in a game. Their 4.8 yards per attempt was not their lowest output, but it was right with all the others. And their 96.16 quarterback rating was the second lowest they've had all season. The 89.26 against Clemson was the only one that was better. Their 10 completions was also their lowest output of the season, and their lowest output since only completing 10 on September 9th of last season against USC. So, you know, you dominated them in a way that none of their opponents had dominated them, and that's really where you want to be, especially when you're playing Game 7, or this would be Game 6 for both teams. So that was an impressive performance, and they did it without a lot of guys that we thought we'd be seeing this team count on coming into the season. So you have to respect them a lot for what they have been able to overcome and still go out there and make plays. And it was great to see Gabriel Rubio back. He played well. Josh Burnham comes back. He played extremely well. You got Christian Gray back. He was a little bit rusty. Had some plays where he wasn't as good, some others where he was good. But overall, it was a strong performance by the Notre Dame defense. And you think about it, I don't know how you guys are, but it's like the way that they play defense now and the way they played defense last year coming into the season, it's almost like I find myself at times maybe being a little bit too critical of the defense, where it's like you're coming down on them for not playing well enough in this situation, but it's still, look at the numbers. You know, they're shutting people down, and it's kind of a byproduct of how good they are, because they'll have these performances where they hold Stanford to their lowest point total of the season. They hold Stanford to their lowest offensive output of the season. They hold Stanford to their fewest rushing yards of the season. They hold Stanford to their fewest passing yards of the season, and you're like, yeah, there's still a lot to clean up. You know what I mean? It's like, you know you're rolling when you completely shut a team down and hold them to their lowest, statistical categories in almost every capacity. And at the end of the game, I'm like, yeah, it was good, but yeah, I know it was their lowest third down performance of the season from a percentage standpoint. It was tied for the lowest and fewest third downs allowed. I get all that, but they got to get a little bit better here, a little bit better there. Stanford goes 1 of 4 on fourth down. Coming into the game, Stanford was 9 of 16 on fourth down. They were over 50% on fourth down. They went 3 for 3 on fourth down against Virginia Tech. Notre Dame, they go 1 of 4 against them. And you're just like, yeah, I know, but and that's the thing that's funny about this is that they have this dominant performance, and I still find myself watching the film being like, yeah, you got to do this better, got to do that better. And you just kind of like, okay, this is how you have an elite defense. When you're putting up elite numbers and you're like, yeah, but I expected them to be even better. Like, that's when you've got a great defense. And so I had to kind of keep that in mind as I was going through the film, because I was actually really critical of the defense at first going through it, because I'm just like, well, you got to do that better. And it's almost to the point where, like, I expect perfection from the defense. And when I don't get it, I'm like, yeah, you got to do better there. That's really a testament to how well coached this football team is on defense and how well they're playing on defense, that I'm nitpicking these type of performances. And I'm not talking about some of the silly stuff. I heard somebody say, well, what's going to happen when they play a real pass offense? And I'm like, you mean like Louisville? When they held Louisville to their lowest passing output of the season from a yards per attempt standpoint, which is still their lowest output of the season, by the way. Held Louisville to their second lowest yard. It was actually at the time their lowest yardage total of the season, and lowest quarterback rating at the time of the season, well below anything else. And you're just like, and that's a pretty darn good pass game. And they're playing at a high level. There's no doubt. And when you watch the film, you say, okay, they played really well, but there's definitely some areas where I think this team can and should get better. And I'll discuss those a little bit. Just a reminder too, if you do have some questions, just throw those questions in there and I'll try to answer a few of those at the end. I'll only really address questions about this game, and then questions if you have a couple about the polls. I know a couple people had questions about that, so we'll get to those too. But the number one key to victory against Stanford was to keep Ashton Daniels in check. That was the big one, and for the most part, they did. Or they weren't great at it early, and that's where you have to kind of look at it and say, okay, did they adjust as the game went on? Well, to a degree, they did, but a lot of it was just clean up some stuff. I mean, you look at the early part of the game, Ashton Daniels has a, 2nd and 8. He gets a 9-yard completion because you have a missed tackle. Next play, they have a little quick 6-yard completion, no big deal. Then 2nd and 4, they've crossed midfield and you get a gain of 27 yards. Why? You got really good coverage down the field. You've got very good pressure contain, and your safety steps down into the open window, the fit, and he just misses in space, and the guy runs for 27 yards. You just had those kind of little mistakes in the game early on where you got to make that play. You had a play where Jalen Sneed is coming off the edge, and he's coming off the edge, and he sees the guy going outside, and he just takes a really poor angle to get to him and allows Ashton Daniels to get outside of him for a positive gain. And those are the things you look at and say, you had some sloppiness early in the game. They struggled a little bit with handling certain things that Stanford was doing early, but at the end of the day, they buckled down and kept them in check. I mean, look, a guy like Ashton Daniels, he's going to make a play or two here and there. First drive of the game, he goes for 27 yards. The rest of the game, Ashton Daniels gained 75 yards. So he didn't gain a whole lot after that. He got almost half his yards in the first couple series, and he had 33 yards in losses. Finished the game with only 42 yards. He was their leading rusher coming in and only 3-point yards per attempt. He was averaging over 5 coming in. Chris Davis had 10 carries for 45 yards. He was averaging 7.3 yards per carry coming into the game. And so you did a very good job, in my opinion, of keeping the Stanford ground game in check. And a big part of that was keeping their quarterback in check. The other thing, too, is they didn't allow him to really get the ball down the field at all. That was an important part of the game as well, is not let him have some of those shots down the field, some of those big play shots down the field. A lot of the success he had throwing the ball was just little drop-offs, a couple screens, couple little quick throws where they were in sort of a no-cover zone. He could find nothing down the field. except for one blown coverage on an over route. So I felt like Notre Dame did a very good job there. I give them a check plus. This is a kid that's a dangerous player that you held to 74 passing yards and 42 rushing yards. Your starting quarterback only has 116 yards of total offense in a game. You succeeded in keeping him contained as a playmaker. So that's an easy check plus for me. Play smart. We talked a lot early coming into the game that this is a very well-coached football team in Stanford. They're not super talented. They've got a talented quarterback, some talented running backs, one really talented receiver. But overall, this is a team that's successful because of how well-coached they are. And you saw that in the game. A lot of different motions. They were putting Emmett Mosley, who's a wide receiver. They were putting him in the game and having him carry the ball out of the backfield in this game, which was not something that we had really seen a ton of, coming into the season. They had done it a little bit. He had 1 carry against Virginia Tech, 2 carries against Clemson. He had 5 against Notre Dame. And they did a great job of handling that. But, they ran a little bit more speed option than we're used to seeing. They did some different wrinkles in the backfield. And Notre Dame had to play smart. And early on, first couple drives, it's not that they didn't play smart. They were slow to react a couple times. There's a couple times you could tell the inside linebackers were not sure what they were seeing, and they were late reacting to a ball. You saw a nice job with the outside players, Xavier Watts, Jordan Clark, Benjamin Morrison did a nice job of funneling things back inside. And then the linebackers were able to clean things up with really nice backside pursuit. So that was good to see. But they adjusted pretty quickly. Early in the game, the speed option was working because they were crashing. Stanford had a really nice scheme. So Notre Dame crashes with their edge, and then they will loop the linebackers around to handle, read zone type of things. Well, so early in the game, Stanford was running outside of the crash and pitching off of that, or pitching off the slot, and they were doing a good job of working their play side tackle and guard up to the second level and getting to the linebackers. So the linebackers couldn't scrape over top. And so that's why they hit a couple of those speed option plays early. Fortunately for Notre Dame, their overall team speed is way better than Stanford's. And so they were able to kind of eat those plays up and not let them get a bunch of chunk yards out of it. But it allowed them to, 4 yards here, 6 yards here. It allowed them to move the chains a little bit early. They started to adjust to it a little bit, but you come out in the second half, and Josh Burnham just makes that great play on it. They were expecting Josh Burnham to crash. Instead, they had Josh kind of feather that play, and then the quarterback thought Josh was going to bite him. He didn't. He then pitches the ball. Josh makes a great instinctive play on it, taps it up in the air, picks it off. I'm going to have to give him a hard time for not scoring. It's a former quarterback that ran for over 1,000 yards as a senior in high school. I was expecting him in the house that one. But it was a great play by Josh. And so you saw Notre Dame make some adjustments there. And there's a couple plays that Stanford had. They had one of their longer runs in the game. I can't remember if it was by Ashton Daniels or not. But he had it was when they were backed up early in the third quarter. It's a 3rd and 7 play. They just had a nice call. They ran right outside of Notre Dame's blitz. This was a really good call by the Stanford coach, and they hit that one. And then Notre Dame buckled down and, of course, forced the turnover. But overall, they played relatively smart. I'm giving them just a check on this because if you break down the film, you'll see that there was about 3 or 4 plays where a better offensive team might have been able to hit a couple big plays in this game. There was a play where Christian Gray bit on a move, and the guy beat him pretty soundly outside. Maybe the safety gets over, but a good quarterback probably drops that thing on the outside, and it's a 30, 40-yard gain. There was another sort of blown coverage type of look where Benjamin Morrison thought he was going to get safety help. The safety help came late. Fortunately, the pressure got to the quarterback. He had to scramble, couldn't see it. So there was a couple plays like that where I felt like a better coach team might have had a chance to hit a couple more big plays. Wasn't bad, but more than I would like. And teams in the future, if you have those same mistakes, might be able to take advantage of it. I'm thinking part of it was because of how much Stanford throws to their running backs and how much their quarterback runs, that maybe some of the defensive backs were caught peeking in the backfield, but certainly something that you needed to be prepared for. I was also surprised that Stanford didn't do anything like a double pass, no reverses, did some really creative things out of their base offense, but they didn't do anything to really catch Notre Dame. And I really was expecting them to do some things to catch Notre Dame. I was surprised they didn't see that. they didn't. I really am. I thought they would do more of some of those sort of trickery types of things, and they didn't, and Notre Dame was able to shut them down in that game. So I thought play smart. They did a solid job of that. Not necessarily a great job of that. And then the final thing was with the Notre Dame defense was get the ball. And we talked about how, look, this is a team that turns the ball over. Their quarterback had thrown an interception in every game. He didn't throw an interception in this game. Honestly, part of it is because he just never threw the ball down the field. I mean, you were in a unique situation where you didn't have as many opportunities to make plays on the ball in this game because they just never really challenged Notre Dame down the field, to be honest with you. They threw one deep ball to the left that was thrown out of bounds. They had one scramble play down the field on the right. They only attempted 4 passes the entire game beyond 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. That's it. They went 2 of 4 for 36 yards on throws beyond 10 yards. That they didn't even – they weren't even going to test Notre Dame at all. On the flip side, the other side of that, Riley Leonard went 6 of 10 on throws beyond 20 yards for, let's see here, that's 129 yards on throws of 10 yards down the field. So completely dominated that part of the matchup. So that's partly why you didn't see them get a chance to really to get those. But Stanford did put the ball on the ground 3 times. Notre Dame only recovered 1 of those fumbles, so they only forced 1 turnover in this game. And that's something that you would have liked to see them do a little bit better job of. But the one fumble that they did recover, they made a great play on it. And it was really – it wasn't a game-changing play because Notre Dame was winning 21-7. But when Josh Burnham made that play, it put the game away. I mean, completely put the game away. I mean, once he makes that recovery and he gets the ball down to the 17-yard line, once they punched it in, the game was over. That was it. And they had no chance after that. So I'll give them a check on this, but it wasn't as good as you like. But honestly, I was a little surprised that Stanford didn't try to do more things to really take more chances in the game. Honestly, I really felt like Coach Taylor realized pretty early that, once Notre Dame kind of jumped on him, is like, look, we're not winning this game. So let's not get too crazy. Let's not show stuff that we want to be able to use on someone we might have a shot with. That may not have been in his mindset, but that's kind of how I felt watching the game. I just expected him to do a little bit more. And then the other thing too is there were some things they did try to get some shots down the field at a couple other times, and there just was nothing there. There was nobody open, and the quarterback wasn't even thinking about throwing the ball down the field. I mean, it's almost like he was just kind of letting the coverage get downfield, and then he was going to take off running. They did a great job, in my opinion, of from a coverage standpoint in this game of completely shutting down Alec Ayamaner, completely shut him down, 3 catches for 16 yards. They did a great job mixing up their coverage looks, doing some bracket coverage at times on different guys where it looks like man, but then Benjamin Morrison would kind of, drop and somebody else would kind of play the inside. And they did some really nice things coverage wise. I did want to clear one thing up from a coverage standpoint. I broke down that big 4th down play that they stopped it. And so there was a slight adjustment to what I said. So Jack Kaiser jumped into that slant window. Part of the reason Jack Kaiser jumped into that slant window was because the running back wearing a swing. And when he saw that the running back wasn't going vertical, he stopped right in that window for Ayamaner. But they were still doing what we talked about because you also saw Drake Bowen fly inside. So Benjamin overplayed the outside. Jack buzzed downhill in the flats, and then Drake was flying over. If he catches a slant route there, he's getting lit up by Drake Bowen. So they did play it, but I did want to point out that one that one added part to it. It was a very good call, but it was also great recognition by Jack Kaiser to see that back wasn't a threat and sit up underneath that slant window. I thought that was very well played by Jack. But I was really impressed by how much Notre Dame mixed up their coverages in this game. Still playing a lot of man, but really did a lot of different things with some bracketed coverages and things like that. I thought the linebackers did a much better job of hunting routes over the middle. They still have to get better at those over routes when the tight end comes from one side and climbs all the way over top to another, especially on scrambles. They've turned that loose multiple times this season, And you're going to see some team with a really good tight end and the ability to protect the quarterback is going to find that and hit that open. They're going to have to do a better job of that. But they're getting a lot better at finding the in-breaking stuff that's coming in towards them and shutting that down. I was very impressed by what I saw from that group as well. So overall, very strong performance from the Notre Dame defense. Not a lot new that we didn't talk about yesterday. Love the performance of the defensive line. Thought the tackles were every bit as good on film as I thought they were live. Gabriel Ruby had a really solid game. There was actually a play that I thought they ran a perimeter play that I thought Josh Burnham came backside and made the play. It's actually Donovan Heinisch. It was a 40 number, but his hustle on that play was great. I thought their pursuit as a defense was excellent in this game. They did lose contain a few times, and they had some missed tackles, which I didn't like. They still struggled a little bit with motion. There was a couple plays where I was surprised that Troy Taylor didn't do a better job of taking advantage of some of that, to be completely honest with you. That's something that's going to have to kind of figure out. But the pursuit was excellent in this game. I thought the discipline was very good in this game for the most part. I thought they played very hard. They were very physical in this game. Physical as defending routes, physical defending the run. They arrived at the ball with a lot of force. They arrived at blockers with a lot of force. I thought the block destruction in this game from the front seven was as good as it's been all season. Again, not a great offensive line, but did a really great job of that. You're seeing guys like Bryce Young, I thought, is really starting to flash. But you also had some instances in this game where you still early on, you did have some sloppiness because you didn't quite get what you were needing to get from some young players. There was a play early where Bryce he's got to get inside of that B gap, and he didn't. He kind of ran right at the center. Kingston's looping around, so that opened up a cutback lane and allowed the running back to get into that hole. If Bryce just kind of gets across the face of that tackle like he's supposed to, he blows that play up. That's all part of the learning process for him. And same thing for Kingston, same thing for Drake. Those things are all things that, hey, you're going to see this and you're going to make that mistake, but you're going to have to learn from it and get better at it. And I thought he did a really good job of that. Don Schuler comes down early, has that big missed tackle on the 27-yard gain. And then I believe it was the next series where they ran a little bubble screen and he just blows it up, or as a jet sweep. Josh Burnham drives the tackle back. Great recognition by Josh. Adon flies downhill and tackles the guy in the backfield. So it's like, okay, yeah, you messed up. Move on, go make a play, make up for it. And I thought Adon did a really nice job of that. And those are things you want to see. Guys are going to make mistakes, right? But how do you react to that mistake? Okay, well, Don made a big mistake early that cost his team. So what does he go do the next series? I believe it was the next series. He goes and makes a big play that puts Stanford behind the sticks. And now their drive is basically in trouble. So you see those type of things. You say, like, this is a really well-coached team, but also a very mentally tough defense, or they're becoming a mentally tough defense. And Saturday was another great example of that. Absolutely. So a really good win for Notre Dame. Very impressed with that win. I'm going to get to some questions here in a little bit, folks. If you do want to get a question in, I got about 10 of them started right now. Just go ahead and hit that MB on it, or the mailbag emoji, and I'll answer some questions that you might have about this game. Or I know there's a question about the polls, so I'll try to get to that as well. But before we do that, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And, of course, as always, if you want to know the best way to support Irish Breakdown, it is always to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You not only have a great community, you get intel, you get breakdowns that you can't get anywhere else, but it also is the best way to support Irish Breakdown because all the revenue the message board goes to Irish Breakdown. And that's why we were able to make a new hire recently. And that's why we're hoping to make some more hires down the road, is because of when that grows, that's basically what we do with it. It's how we can grow and how we can get bigger and better and continue to hopefully give you even better and better content as we move forward. So you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Before we get out of here, I did want to get to some questions from you guys, and I appreciate it. And, of course, the super chats I really, really appreciate from y'all. We had a super chat from Anthony Solomon. Thanks for the show, Bryan. You are very welcome, Anthony. And I'll be honest with you, I did kind of think for like 2 minutes about not doing it tonight and maybe doing it tomorrow because I'm not feeling great. But I was like, you know what? I want to talk some ball tonight, and I want to hang out with y'all a little bit tonight. So we're doing that, and I'm excited about it. Now that we're doing it, I'm glad that I did it. And glad we had a chance to talk some ball, and I appreciate your super chat. Christopher Hardy with a super chat. Thank you, Christopher. Thanks for the show. You're welcome, sir. This is for you doing a solo UFR. Love learning what I didn't get to see on the TV copy or just didn't notice in the flow of the game. I appreciate you, Christopher. And Christopher, I have a question for you. Are you a member of the premium board? I am, because if you're not, I am gonna have some videos up this week, and I'll have one tomorrow looking at some of the pass game stuff and run game stuff, and I'm really hoping that this week I'm gonna be able to get a defensive one up as well. But we shall see if I'm able to kind of to get that one. So yeah, definitely check that out, and I really appreciate that, and you're gonna get a chance to see that. And the reason I do those breakdowns is it's to help. I mean, I like to teach the game, right? But I do think that when people get to see the game from the all 22 perspective, it helps you say like, okay, yeah, I didn't see that guy was open like that. I didn't see that guy was, covered like that. Or I didn't see that play work like, now I see why the quarterback did that. Now I see why that play didn't work or why that play did work. And I just think it makes all of us better informed fans. And that's why we do what we do. So I appreciate you, Christopher, very much. Michael S. by so hold any reason Mitchell Evans seemed completely absent from many plays. I mean, he played more snaps than any tight end on the roster. Number one, he's not running routes with really a lot of urgency. And in this particular game, the stuff that they were trying to get going was to the receivers. I mean, this was a game where Stanford is going to key the tight end a little bit, and there's some stuff on the perimeter there, and they just went to the guys that were there. I mean, look, Michael, completed over 70% of the passes, were on pace for 300 yards. They were, ripping them up with what they were doing. That was there. Stanford has been hurt pretty badly by Notre Dame tight ends in recent years. I think that was a part of their game plan, was to stop that, and Notre Dame did a good job of attacking other parts of the field. And a super chat also from Jimmy Page. Jimmy, thank you very much, man. Appreciate you. Just think, if we were healthy, future is bright. Somebody asked me this, and I don't remember if it was on the show or if it was, I think it might have been the Friday. I think it might have been the Friday mailbag, maybe the Wednesday upon further or by so hold. But somebody asked something along the lines of how would this team be if the offensive line was healthy? Or, if they had like it was if Joe Alt and Blake Fisher both came back. And I said, if those two guys both came back, this team's undefeated and they haven't played a close game. And I wholeheartedly believe that. But then I started thinking, I was like, and I don't know if we talked about this in the show, but I was like, even if just Charles Jagasaw and one of Billy Schrouth and Ashton Craig were healthy, I think it's a very different looking team. Very different looking team. And if you have a 6'7", 330-pound left tackle that can handle himself in the pass game and be a dominant run blocker, this team looks a lot different. And you can't discount that. Football's a part of injury, and you don't get asterisks by losses and wins because you were missing certain players. You got to go out there. You're Notre Dame, you're O-line, you got to figure it out, and they weren't able to. But you think about being down 3 stars in the O-line, your starting tight end is banged up mentally and physically. You're missing your top 2 Vipers, and with your top 2 Vipers out, Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patel, who are both playing very good football, you come into the next game and you're next. So now you're number 3 Viper, and a guy they moved from defensive end who'd missed 3 straight games combines for 7 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a forced fumble in the game after you had just lost your top 2 Vipers. And you just look at it and you're like, boy, this is a team with a lot of grit. You lose Jason Onye, and Gabriel Rubio steps into the lineup and he plays really well. And this team is very, I questioned their focus and their maturity early in the season, and it needed to be questioned because of the way that they stepped up the way that they stepped into that Northern Illinois game, feeling really good about themselves, no fire, no passion, no energy, some really bad answers in the postgame show. And you wondered, how's this team going to respond? And for the most part, this team has responded really well, and they've faced even more diversity than they've had. Then Jordan Faison didn't play on Saturday. He was a starting receiver for you. He didn't play on Saturday. It's another injury they had. Cooper Flanagan was very limited. He only played like 12 snaps in the game. So you're looking at, your starting kicker gets hurt in the first quarter, and so then your backup kicker makes the next 5 extra points. Your backup kickoff guy, who's almost 30, literally comes in. He does his job the way it's supposed to be done. This is a team that has shown a lot of grit in that regard. You hope that the depth doesn't suffer too much as you get deeper into the season. But so far, man, it's been fun to watch this group really shine and grow and develop. And maybe it doesn't end the way that we would hope it would this year. I really feel like if Notre Dame, let's say Notre Dame wins a game or two in the playoff, or just one game in the playoff, I think there's this offseason going to have a lot of what ifs. What if Jagasol doesn't go down and Boubacar doesn't go down, or this guy and this guy? There's going to be a lot of that conversation to be had. The good news is that this has also opened up opportunities for other players. Bryce Young's playing a lot more now than he would have if there weren't all the injuries. He is. You know, you look at a guy like Leonard Moore and the experience he got because of some of the Chance Tucker getting hurt, then Benjamin Morrison being limited, then Jaden Mickey leaves the team, and then Christian Gray gets hurt. Now Leonard Moore all of a sudden has got a bunch of snaps under his belt as a true freshman. And yes, these things are problematic for maybe the present to a degree, but it really is open up a lot of opportunities for some young guys. Anthony Knapp's another example. I mean, he should not be playing right now. Not that he's always stinks, but just you don't recruit Anthony Knapp thinking you're going to be our day one starter at left tackle. You don't do that. But he's answered the bell, and even though he hasn't played very well, he's playing hard. And this experience is going to be great for him down the road. Sam Pendleton's gaining a ton of experience this season. And so those things are all going to prove beneficial down the road, even if maybe it doesn't quite work out how you hope it will this season. But I'm not even willing to say that's for sure, because there's still a lot of depth here. And man, it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch. Paolo 27. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thanks, Drisk, for doing a stream tonight. Let's go Irish. You are welcome. Appreciate that. Let's get to some more here real quick. We have one from Christopher Hardy. Another question from Christopher. Thank you. After showing that they can have success throwing the ball, what would the next step of improvement be for you? Well, I just think it's right now for me, it's not so much about improvement per se outside of the pass pro still needs improved. I would say it's more about enhancing for me now. It's not so much about, okay, you've had a pretty competent pass attack the last 3 games outside of a quarter against Miami of Ohio. You know, your pass game was very competent against Louisville when it needed to be. It got the job done. It was good against Stanford, not great, but good against Stanford. And so, it was, you had some bad mistakes by Riley in the Purdue game, but you also had some nice plays. So, I mean, it's been ascending ever since that really bad performance against Northern Illinois. Now it's about enhancing it, right? It's about, okay, we're getting good at this. Let's do this. Let's have some stuff off of this. Notre Dame ran a double post wheel concept on Saturday, which I liked. It ended up not being there because of the protection, but you're starting to see some more of that stuff where Mike Denbrock's getting more and more comfortable. So other than just the pass pro still has to improve, it's really just about building on the foundation that's being laid. Hey, Riley Leonard did a really nice job. Clean up this mistake, clean up that mistake, clean up this read. That's what quarterbacks should always be looking to do. Anthony Knapp, you struggled early and you buckled down, but now we got to figure out how we can get you to start early. A couple misfits on defense that you saw in this game, but you're always going to have some of that stuff. Now it's about limiting that even more and more and more. The mistakes have gone down each week in the pass game. Keep doing that, and then enhance your overall package and continue to enhance it. If that means maybe some personnel changes, make some personnel changes. But say, hey, look, we're going to get better and better and better. We're going to add more to what we do. But first, you have to lay a foundation of what are we good at? And then get good at that and build on that and say, okay, how do we enhance that? Now that you've played 5-6, you had 5 games in a bye week, you have a lot more data on what you're good at and what you're not good at, and then you build on it. And we saw that on Saturday. I mean, some of the deep shots that Riley Leonard threw, they were actually not – they were good balls, except for the seam route to Jaden Greathouse. The other 2 were good balls, even though the one fell incomplete. It's just, they were one-man reads. Boom. Here's your read. You designed it to get open. You called it. He let it rip. And sometimes you got to go make a play. Sometimes the defense makes a play, and then one of them you hit. And, those are things you're going to see. Garth Cassidy loved Heinisch at defensive tackle instead of nose tackle. Think it's his best position. Thank you for the super chat, Garth. I appreciate you very much, man. Notre Dame 2164. Is there a reason Cam Williams isn't getting garbage time snaps? I can't imagine he can't run a simple post fly pattern. I don't know. I don't know if he's banged up. I don't know what the deal is. There was a lot of guys that I thought would have played the fourth quarter of that game that didn't play, and I'm curious as to why. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I thought the same thing on Saturday, to be honest with you. Like, we don't see any Cam Hart. I mean, Cam Williams. Like, I love Devin Ford, great kid, but it's like, why is a 6-year senior Devin Ford carrying the football in the fourth quarter? Why isn't it Aeneas and Kedron the whole fourth quarter? Why do you wait to the last drive to get Kedron the ball? I want to see Aeneas and Kedron get that whole fourth quarter. And there's some of that. Yeah. Christopher Hardy, where the interior defensive line showed a bit more fire, do we think that may be beginning to trend like we saw to finish the 23 season from them? I mean, I hope so. I mean, like, honestly, Christopher, if you think about it, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but Howard Cross and Riley Mills didn't really start rolling in 2023 until sort of the game around 5 or 6. I know for Howard Cross for sure it wasn't until game 5 or 6. I mean, he was solid early in the season. He was certain they were both better than what they've been so far this season. Like, there's no even debating that. They were definitely better than they've been so far this season, but they didn't really start playing at a super high level until about game 5 or 6. And then they, really took off from that point in time. I mean, game 5 for Riley Mills was Ohio State. He had 4 hurries in that game, 3 against Duke, 2 against Louisville, 4 against USC. He was pretty good against Clemson, really good against Wake, great against Stanford, great against Oregon State. His best performances were later in the season. I mean, if you look at his, highest graded games, I mean, a lot of those were middle to late in the season games. And, you hope that he continues to do that. If you look at Howard Cross, it was a very similar thing. He was solid early in the season last year, but he was unspectacular. I don't think Howard Cross got his first tackle for loss last year until game 6. I'm actually pretty sure that that's true. So if you look at Howard last season and you look at his production, he had 7 tackles for loss last season and 2 sacks, and he was named an All-American. This year, through 6 games, he has 5.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks in 6 games. Now, the difference is he's not making as many overall plays. He only has 16 tackles. Last year had 66 tackles. So obviously he's not as a consistent of a producer, but his playmaking has been good. He's had at least a half a sack in every game, despite the fact he hasn't played all that well. He didn't make his first sack or his first tackle for loss last year till game 6. So after 6 games last year, Howard Cross had 3.5 tackles for loss and 1 sack. This year, through 6 games, he has 5.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. And so you hope that production continues to jump and grow as the season goes on. And you just hope that that's kind of who they are. They're just, guys that just need a little bit of time to get rolling. And that's where they're at. So hopefully that's the case. Andrew Gilmore. It's a good observation too, Christopher. Andrew Gilmore, is Bo Collins a net positive or negative? He does make plays, no doubt, but he drops in the strip. Could have costly against a better team. It's still a net positive. I mean, he's got to clean some of that stuff up. The drop against Louisville was not good. The second drop was not a drop. The drop against Stanford, again, he's got to catch that ball. It got tipped. It was kind of going like this. It changed the direction. He's got to catch it, and he knew he'd see his hands. The strip's a bad play. Can't have that. But do they beat Texas A&M without Bo Collins? It's a fair question. He still made some plays on Saturday. He still did some good things on Saturday. He's blocked well. So he's definitely been a net positive. And I, cleaning up some of that stuff, Andrew's important. I'm not going to dismiss. I'm not going to, come on, man, you're being too critical of him. No, dude, those are things that can't happen. Like, drops and fumbles by wide receivers would drive me nuts. I mean, some of my better receiving corps, if they drop balls, after practice, we'd have to do, as a unit, 10 up downs for every time they drop the ball. I don't know if you're allowed to even do that stuff anymore, but 10 10 up downs for every ball that I deem to drop. And I hated that stuff. I mean, that's your job, catch the ball. And I'm not talking about you go up for it and get one hand on it and you don't bring it. I'm talking just you know what I'm saying? Like, I wasn't stupid about it just to make him do a bunch of up downs because I didn't want to wear him out. But I can't stand that stuff. So he's got to clean that stuff up, but he's definitely done a lot of really good things for this football team. There's no doubt about that. He's done a lot of good things for this football team as well. I mean, look, first drive of the game, I mean, he has that drop, but here's the thing I loved about what we saw from that game and what I love about Riley Leonard. So he catches the first play of the game, really nice comeback, or a really nice stop route, pushes the guy vertically, does what I said last week they need to do more of. They did a much better job of that, by the way. You know, we talked last week about how I want to see them push their stop routes a little bit more. We saw that a little bit of that this week. Bo had that, catches a pass for 8 yards. Next play, runs a glance route, drops it. You're in 3rd and 2, and you're like, dude, drop the ball. What happened on the very next play? Riley Leonard went right back to him. Bo ran a good route, got open, converts the 3rd down. So, yeah, he dropped the pass, no doubt. You can't drop that pass, but what happened on the next play? Bo made a play, converted to 3rd down, and they got in position to be effective. You know, so, man, I tell you what, it's like you see those things, you're like, yeah, you got to do a better job there, man. He gets stripped, and he loses the ball. And as you pointed out rightly, man, that can maybe hurt you against better teams. But what does he do? 3rd quarter, he gets a chance to help put the game away, and he goes out and makes a play. So, yeah, get some of that consistency out, and you'll be an even better player. But overall, he's certainly been a net positive for them. Absolutely. Let me get a couple of these, make sure I got haven't missed any questions here real quick. All right. We got another one from Andrew Gilmore. Andrew said, Bryan, David Lowe, I am going to get to your ranking question. I'm just going to do that last because we'll talk about the game and stuff, and then we'll do the ranking question last. Andrew Gilmore said, Bryan, Indy still struggles with jet sweeps. How do we solve that? I don't know that I'd say they struggle with jet sweeps. What was Stanford's biggest gain on a jet sweep on Saturday? 4 yards. I don't say that. 6. I think 6 yards. I don't think they struggled on jet sweeps at all. I mean, look, there's an element of you're gonna give up a little something on that, right? You're not gonna have a bunch of minuses, but I mean, they had some tackles for loss. They blew up. I think it was a jet sweep or a bubble for a tackle for loss. But I mean, Emmett Mosley, a lot of stuff he was doing was jet sweeps, and he had 5 carries for 0 yards. Yeah, 5 carries for 0 yards. Bryce Farrell's a receiver. He had 1 carry for 5 yards. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree, Andrew, that they struggle with jet sweeps. Maybe on the board you can point out a couple plays that you perceive to be struggles, and we can engage it. And I can look at the plays and maybe put the film on there. Say, okay, because like this would be helpful, Andrew. This is something we can do on the board during the week. Is if you say, hey, look, this play right here, I think they made a mistake. What do you think? Or I think they're struggling with this. Give me some examples, and then I can put the all 22 film on there and show you why. Hey, I actually don't think that was a mistake. Or I can look at it and say, you know what? Hey, I see what you're saying, and here's why I think it was a mistake. So if you want to talk about that on the board, Andrew, be a little easier to so I can understand why you see it as struggles. I think they still struggle with motion, but I don't see it as them still struggling with jet sweeps. I don't think Stanford did much at all on jet sweeps on Saturday. I mean, you know, their ball carriers averaged 4.53, 3.3, 4.55, 0.3, and 0 yards a carry on Saturday. I don't think they struggled with it. I don't think they struggled with anything against Stanford. So, yeah, let's chat about it on the board, because then I'll be able to kind of have a better sense of what you're seeing, and then we can address it. Brandon Plensner, here's an interesting question. Pick 3 players that are out you wish were healthy: Jagasol, Patelho, Traore, or Jagasol, Shrouth, and Traore. I'd go Jagasol, Shrouth, and Traore. Look, Patelho plays one position, same position as Traore. Between Josh Burnham, Junior Chilamaka, and Logan Thomas, I can handle one of those Vipers. I mean, if you had RJ Oben and Bryce Young at end, and then Boubacar and Junior at Viper, and then Josh Burnham's playing both, that's a heck of a defensive line and edge position. And that doesn't take anything away from what Jordan Patel is doing. But if you could give me Jagasol and Billy Shrouth on my offensive line, if I'm Notre Dame, and I still have Boubacar, bro, I'm telling you, I'm real happy with where this team is right now. Real happy with where this team is. So if I could go back in reverse time and change certain things, and I can make sure those 2 guys weren't hurt, that would be it. It would be it'd be the 2 offensive linemen plus Traore. That would be where I'm at. Super chat from MB. Thank you very much for the super chat. Crazy thought. Would love your perspective on given strength of running back room, convert Love to wide receiver for the season. Probably dumb, but feels so exciting. I mean, there's no need to do it. You know, in modern football, you can do a lot of things, honestly, MB, where you can put a running back outside and do things with him outside. I mean, look, Jeremiah Love's a really good running back. And I don't know that you would want to take that away. It's not like you don't have athletes. I mean, you got Jaden Greathouse, a receiver. You got Chris Mitchell. You've got some good football players out there. I am not taking the guy that is now my leading rusher and Jeremiah Love, a guy that's on pace for, you know, almost 1,000 yards if you include the postseason, just rushing, who's averaging 6.8 yards per carry and has 6 rushing touchdowns. I'm not taking him away from running back just to have him be a receiver and say he could do some exciting things there, because there's nothing that precludes him from being able to do those things as a running back out of the backfield, lining him up outside. I'm not stealing from that room because it's loaded to help the receiver room, because I want to make sure that this part's still loaded. There's things you can do. Well, I'm not doing it if there are things I can do to still get that impact over here. And it's a lot easier for me to have him as a running back and then do some things in the throwing game than it would be for me to have him as a running back or a receiver and then try to do some jets and some different things as running back. Running back needs that work with the cuts, the reads, the vision, the footwork, the steps. He needs that. And then I can have him go outside and run a now screen for 25 yards, run a slot fade, which he's done this year, or have him run on a crossing route, do some different things with him. You can certainly do that. And that is going to be something that certainly helps a lot. So I'm going to get back to this here real quick. David Lowe says, how do we feel about our ranking? So how do we feel about Notre Dame's ranking? I mean, Notre Dame's not way off. I think they should be ranked a couple spots higher. I should probably do a top 25 and start putting that out. But the reality is that what we're seeing is an example of why I can't stand the media voting on. We already know that the coaches poll is a joke. I mean, it's not coaches actually voting. It's some of them are. It's SIDs and, you know, coaches that are they don't know. They don't study these teams. They're not breaking down stats. It's useless. And the media, like I talk to different people. God, I love Bill Bender. You guys know that. But we're having this conversation on Thursday about Baylor versus Iowa State, and it's like it's just a feeling because you think that Iowa State's better coming into the year. And like I was having a conversation with an AP voter today. I said, explain to me how you can have Baylor 10 or BYU 10 spots below Iowa State when BYU has 2 wins over teams you have ranked and Iowa State has none. And I said, so BYU has beat SMU, who's ranked. They have beat K-State, who's ranked. They beat K-State by 29. And the best win for Iowa State's over an Iowa team that's unranked. Just got smoked by Ohio State last week. And it's like, well, you know, I like Iowa. And it's all built on preconceived notions. And I said, look, you want to know why BYU, whose opponents overall have a better record and who has 2 ranked wins, is ranked behind Iowa State? Preseason, media picked Iowa State to finish 6th in the Big 12. They finished BYU to finish 13th in the Big 12. So they're all still living and I get this response from a lot of people. Well, I'm not sold on BYU yet. I don't care if you're sold on BYU yet. Well, what if they go lose their next 5 games? Then drop them. But right now they have wins over 2 ranked teams. 2. One of them they went on the road and beat that team. And so you're still living in this world of preseason expectations, and so that's why a team is ranked where they're ranked. And we also are living in this world of people obsessing over losses. People that I respect in the business, and there's not a ton, but as far as national, but people I respect still keep talking about the Northern Illinois loss. And I'm like, guys, it was a bad loss, but we're halfway through the season. You should be ranked more by who you beat. And don't talk to me about, well, that unranked team that beat that team is better than the unranked team that beat that team. Yes, Notre Dame had a bad loss to Northern Illinois, who's 4-2, and whose only losses are 4-2 Buffalo, who just smacked Toledo this weekend, and 4 in NC State, a game where they completely outplayed NC State. They just turned the ball over. Northern Illinois is a quality football team. No excuse losing to them. But are we really basing Notre Dame being behind Tennessee and behind Clemson on, well, they have better losses. That makes no sense to me. When you look at Clemson, you say, okay, yeah, Clemson has better losses, but Clemson's. I wrote about it in my rankings article. Like, this is what's so ridiculous about this ranking. Let me go find the AP poll in the ranking for the AP poll. Just give me a second. Because when you look at it, Notre Dame is ranked 12th in the AP poll, right? And Clemson is now ranked 10th. All right. So here's the resumes for these two teams. Clemson right now, their opponents have a combined, let me pull it up here. Clemson's best win right now is over 3-4 NC State. Every other team they beat is either 2-4 or 1-5. Their opponent record on the season, I thought it was 10-18 is what I thought that I had down. No, Clemson's opponents have a combined record of the teams they've beat have a combined record of 10-21, and they have yet to beat a team with a winning record. Notre Dame has beaten 5-1 Texas A&M, was ranked 14th in the poll, and Notre Dame also beat a 4-2 Louisville team. You have to get down to the number 3 team on Notre Dame's schedule that they beat, Stanford, to get to a team with a losing record. That's the second best team that Stanford has beat, or that Clemson has beat, is Stanford, record-wise. And the best team they beat is an NC State team that's 3-4 and just lost to Wake Forest a week ago. And this past weekend lost at home to Syracuse, a team that Stanford beat. So you're basing this whole thing on the loss. And again, it was a bad loss. And in week 3, people say, like, people get mad. Well, how come Notre Dame dropped X number spots, but when Bama lost to Vanderbilt, they only dropped? Well, because losing to a Power 5 team is not going to have the same perception as losing to them. And in the immediacy of Notre Dame dropping to Northern Illinois, I understood the big drop. You lost to a MAC team at home when you played. You looked terrible in that game. I have no problem with that. I'm not going to drop Bama as much losing the 5 points to a Power 5 team. I'm just not going to do who beat Virginia Tech. So it isn't as bad of a loss. Bama's loss isn't as bad. Tennessee's losing to a 4-2 Arkansas team is not as bad of a loss as Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. It's just not. I'm not going to argue that. What I'm going to argue is it is a very faulty premise that you are obsessing on that one and ignoring the vast difference in quality of wins. And Tennessee has a slightly better case than Clemson. Their opponent's record is a combined 13-18. They have beaten 0 teams that are ranked in the top 25, and they've only beaten 1 team with a winning record. They just needed overtime to beat a 3-3 Florida team that is, simply put, not very good. And they needed overtime to win that game. And, that team that, and we're doing a little bit of the transitive property, and it's not in the way that people normally do it, but you look at Florida, who Tennessee needed overtime to beat, and it was at Tennessee. That team played Texas A&M at home 2 weeks after Notre Dame beat them at A&M, and they lost by 13 in a game that it was not very competitive. A month later, that team goes on the road to Tennessee and takes Tennessee to overtime. And so you look at it and say, well, what's the resume? Oh, so is your resume built on? Well, yeah, but when Tennessee played those teams that sucked, they blew them out. Now, they have not looked good at all playing mediocre teams. And so when you look at A&M or you look at Tennessee, they beat a 4-2 Oklahoma State team by 10 on the road. Oklahoma State's 4-2 and unranked. They just got destroyed by Texas. Notre Dame went on the road. They won 25-15. Notre Dame goes on the road to an SEC team who's 5-1 and ranked 14th. They beat them by 10 points. Then your next best win is over Florida, who's 3-3. You needed to go to overtime against Florida to beat them. Notre Dame's next best win is over Louisville, who they beat at home also. In a game, they won by a touchdown, but controlled the game throughout. Fell behind 7-0, jumped on them 21-7. Every time Louisville scored to make it a single-score game, Notre Dame went down and scored again and pulled away. They were up 2 touchdowns for most of the second half. And just Notre Dame outplayed them. The next best win for Tennessee is over Chattanooga. So you look at it and you say you're basing your entire premise on, well, they have a bad loss. All right, they do have a bad loss. But are we really judging teams on what they do on their worst day and ignoring the fact that, yeah, this team doesn't have any bad losses, but they have no good wins? No good wins. Tennessee has 0 good wins. None. I don't think Oklahoma on the road is a good team. Oklahoma, that's an incredibly banged-up Oklahoma team as well. Florida's not a good win. Clemson beating NC State is not a good win at all. And Notre Dame would destroy NC State if they played NC State. So that's my problem with it, is a lot of this stuff is built on your preseason perceived opinions. That's why people can convince themselves not to rank BYU higher, even though BYU has wins over 2 currently ranked top 25 teams with a combined record of 10-2, right? So SMU's 5-1, K-State's 5-1, 10-2, and the 2 losses are both to BYU. But we're going to talk ourselves into this mental gymnastics of dropping them in the rankings. But we're going to talk about how, yeah, but Iowa State has that really good win at Iowa where they kind of trailed most of the game and came back and won late over an Iowa team that I like more than the teams. Well, then I asked them, so well, if you like Iowa more, then how do you have them ranked lower than those other 2 teams? I mean, what is the next bet? You know what the second best win for Iowa State is this year? Do you guys know what the second best win for Iowa State is this year? North Dakota. 4-2 North Dakota is their next best win. Yeah, they got a nice win over Iowa. And they beat Baylor. And they beat West Virginia. West Virginia's a nice team. They're 3-3. I think North Dakota could beat them. And then so I followed up with this one voter, and he said, well, BYU's been outgained multiple times this year. And I said, well, that's a flawed way of looking at it, because outgained, there's a lot of context that goes into being outgained, including field position. And I said, okay, well, you can look at that, but I think that's flawed. How about this? How about you look at yards per play? That's a much better example, because if I start at midfield and you start at your own 25 and we both score touchdowns, you're going to have more yards than I have. If I start at midfield and you start at the 25 and I go score a touchdown, but you kick a 35-yard field goal, I have more points than you. You have more yards than me. Look at yards per play. The only game that they've been out, the opponent has had a higher yards per play average than BYU this year was, I believe, Baylor. I believe is the only team that has more yards per play. No, it was Kansas State, 5.10 to 5.02. So he talks about Baylor is a team that Baylor outgained BYU by 20 yards. Baylor had a 5.32 or 5.09 yards per play average, and BYU had a 5.09. Do you know why BYU was even that close? Because BYU was winning 31-14 at halftime. And the whole second half was hey, run the clock out. We're not running a normal offense. Whereas Iowa State beat Baylor more convincingly. But they did so because they were only up 16-14 at halftime and then kind of pulled away late. Whereas BYU let Baylor back in the game wrongly, but they were whooping them early and kind of called the dogs off. So which game was actually more impressive? And so you look at this faulty way of thinking about things. That is what happens, with all due respect, when people who don't know football start making football decisions. And you do not have to know football to be a great beat writer. Great. Tim Priester is someone I have a great deal of respect for. Lou Samoji is another person I have a great deal of respect for. Guys that I grew up reading. Tim Priester played baseball at Notre Dame. Lou Samoji didn't play sports at all in college. But they don't, so you say, well, okay, well, can they be great beat writers if they've never played football? Of course they can, because they can learn the game and they can do. But there comes a point in time where it's like, you have to know your limitations. And that's something that Lou was always good about. But you have to be willing to learn and study. And I've had conversations with Tim Priester that make me believe that even he's been doing this a long time, he still challenges himself and he wants to learn and he wants to get, and you have some of these beat writers that just they don't do that. and they're making decisions about who should be ranked where when they don't understand how to think through, how a team is better. They're just looking at numbers and they don't have any idea how to have context in those numbers. And so I just think that's a really flawed way of looking at these type of things. And you have to at some point in time be willing to say, I'm evaluating this rankings. And then the final flaw is they're too reactive to the most recent week. I think that's a major flaw. So if I'm doing a ranking, I'm okay if you want to have BYU and Iowa State ahead of Notre Dame. They haven't lost a game yet. But in my opinion, Tennessee should not be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. You look at Clemson should definitely not be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Notre Dame, yeah, they have a much worse loss, but Clemson got blown out in their game. But you look at different aspects of the top 25 ranking, and you say, okay, LSU's ranked 8th based on what? I had a big win over Ole Miss. All right, cool. They needed overtime to beat the number 18 team in the country. Good job. 5-2 Ole Miss, who also lost to unranked Kentucky, who just got beat by Vanderbilt. Well, okay, cool. Notre Dame went on the road, so LSU beats Ole Miss at home in overtime. Great win. I predicted them to win the game. I predicted 31-27. They won 29-26. Played out pretty close to how I thought the game would play out. Ole Miss, I believe, led the entire game. The only lead I believe LSU had was the final, at the end of the game. Whereas Notre Dame goes on the road and plays a team who's now currently 14th, so 4 spots ahead of Ole Miss, and they beat them by 10 in regulation. Competitive game, but they pulled away late. So LSU lost to USC, who's currently unranked and 3-3. So LSU has now beaten Ole Miss, who's not. So their best win is not as good as Notre Dame's best win. It's not. Who else did LSU beat? Okay. They had a come-from-behind 3-point victory over a South Carolina team that's 3-3. Okay. Well, is that a better win than Notre Dame beating Louisville by a touchdown in a game that they controlled? They beat UCLA by 17. UCLA stinks. They beat South Alabama and they beat Nicholls State. UCLA's 1-5. South Alabama's 2-4. So, okay, they both have great wins. They don't have so even if you say the Ole Miss win is every bit as good as A&M, okay, agree to disagree, but let's roll with that. Okay, well, their next best win is over who? What's their next best win? 3-3 South Carolina. Notre Dame beat 4-2 Louisville. Right? Their next best win is over what? 2-4 South Alabama. Is it over 1-5 UCLA? Well, Notre Dame's got a better win than that, and 2-4 Syracuse. You get what I'm saying? So why is LSU ranked ahead of them? Well, they play in the SEC and they don't have as bad of a loss. Okay, whatever. I mean, I still think win should matter more. So I look at all these different things and so Jim says not justifying the AP, but maybe they're just trying to figure out ND and want more. But that here's the thing, Jim. You're applying your emotional feeling about Notre Dame to this conversation. All right, cool. I want more. Jim, how would you feel right now if your favorite team choked away a game to USC at the beginning of the year, struggled to beat Nicholls State? If the starting quarterback for South Carolina doesn't get hurt, you lost that game. You beat a bad 1-5 UCLA game, the sloppy win. You beat South Alabama, and then you trail the whole game against Ole Miss and then win in overtime. Maybe you're happy about that, but the way you've reacted to Notre Dame, probably not, because beating A&M doesn't mean anything to you. Beating Louisville doesn't mean anything to you. So if you were a fan of these teams, you'd feel the exact same way, Jim. I mean, if you were a fan of Clemson right now, what are you hanging your hat on? Hey, we have the best loss in the country. Okay, well, who'd you beat? You beat nobody. You've literally beat 0 teams with a winning record. You're telling me you would be happier as a Clemson fan right now with who they beat than Notre Dame simply because you can't emotionally get past the Northern Illinois game? You're going to ignore the A&M victory. You're going to ignore the Louisville victory and grab onto, but we beat 3-4 NC State and we got a better loss. That's your whole argument. They got a better loss. Okay. Well, if you're mad, I want to see more from Notre Dame. I want to see more from Clemson because they've beaten nobody so far. They didn't look that great beating Florida State. SMU looked way better beating Florida State than Clemson did. Way better. Boston College looked better beating Florida State than Clemson did. So why are they ranked higher? Well, because they have a better loss. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. So I want to see more from Notre Dame. Then I want to see more from a lot of other teams ranked ahead of Notre Dame. I want to see more from Alabama. Alabama just needed a come from behind or hold off NC State or South Carolina at the end of the game. Not a very good South Carolina team. While I'm watching Notre Dame curb stomp Stanford, I'm watching Alabama almost drop it. Alabama for the last 10 quarters has been garbage. Garbage for the last 10 quarters. Notre Dame had a bad game. Some of y'all are still pissing and moaning about a 25-point win. When you're mad about a 25-point win, your team's pretty freaking good. They had one bad Saturday. Horrible, awful, inexcusable bad Saturday. And in week 3 and in week 4, I understood holding that against Notre Dame a little bit. But we're now 6 games into the season, 7 weeks into the season. We know who A&M is now. We know who Louisville is now. Somebody said they're hurt by how Louisville's stinking. Louisville does not stink. Louisville's 4-2. They beat a good Georgia Tech team who's 5-2. They beat a 4-2 Virginia team on the road. They lost to a top 25 SMU team, and they lost to what should be a top 10 Notre Dame team on the road, right? They're a good football team. How are they not ranked and Michigan is ranked? Michigan got destroyed by Texas, right? And Michigan went on the road and lost to a Washington team that a week later got destroyed by Iowa. Why is Michigan ranked and Louisville's not? Perception. Perceived perception. Preseason perception. So the rankings are incredibly flawed. The voting process by these people is incredibly flawed. And it just reminds me every day why I'm very happy that these votes are no longer impacting who plays for a title. I'm very happy about that. And at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is going to get worked out, and this team's going to beat that team, or this team's going to be that team. If Notre Dame goes and loses to Georgia Tech next week, it doesn't matter. It works itself out. But for the present time, we don't know what's going to happen down the road. So when this AP voter tells me we'll all work itself out, that's irrelevant. This is a ranking for now. We're not ranking projecting in the future. Like the SP Plus still has Ohio State ahead of Oregon, and because if it's a neutral field, that's nonsense. It's nonsense. What the ranking is supposed to reflect who teams are today. And today, Notre Dame is a bottom of the top 10 team. They should absolutely be ranked ahead of Clemson. They should absolutely be ranked ahead of Tennessee. They should be ranked ahead of LSU, although not absolutely. That's a great win by LSU on Saturday. Great win by LSU on Saturday. That's a good Ole Miss team. And Ole Miss showed up. Ole Miss played hard. LSU played hard. That was a great game. And LSU did what they needed to do and won that game. They should be a borderline top 10 team as well. They just shouldn't be ahead of Notre Dame because when you look at the entirety of their schedules, Notre Dame has a much more impressive resume, in my opinion, than LSU does. So to me, it's a flawed process. It's flawed thinking, and there's no accountability for that thinking. Like Alabama being number 7, based on what? They got a win over Georgia. All right, cool. Since that win over Georgia, they've sucked. So, that's where I'm at. And that's how I feel about the rankings. And I think it's a very flawed process. Very, very, very flawed process. I report on it. I talk about it because it's newsworthy, but I'm certainly happy that they don't have a say on who plays for championship. And we know that because the AP voters, the committee always has rankings that are very different from the polls. And I point, remember 2020 when BYU got dropped or ranked real low in the first playoff thinking and ESPN and the voters lost their mind. They're undefeated. And I'm like, they haven't played anybody. And the committee said they haven't played anybody. And then they finally played a good team in Coastal Carolina, got smacked. And they've never put a lot of stock into that. And I'm glad. And I hope that continues. And, I hope that continues. All right, so that's that. We did have a couple super chats pop up, so I appreciate y'all. Andrew Gilmore, why isn't Kirby Smart instantly suspended a la Woody Hayes? He viciously shoved the Mississippi State quarterback. I think he should be suspended. I do not think he should get the same penalty as Woody Hayes. Woody Hayes literally punched a kid. I think Kirby Smart acted like an emotional midget. That's not a nice thing to say. He acted like an emotional child. He is a grown man who has no control over his emotions during football games. He acts like an absolute idiot on the sidelines of games. And he's running over because he's pissed at coordinators, and he shoves a kid. I don't think he ran over to shove the kid, but he ran over and pushed the kid off of him. He should be suspended. That's a difference than grabbing a kid and punching a kid like Woody Hayes did. So it is different. But he should absolutely be suspended. You can't put your hands on it. I'll put it like this. If Jeff Lebby would have pushed Carson Beck in the exact same circumstance, he's running over to beef with a ref or another coach, and he engaged with the kid and then shoves, whether he thought he was doing it or not, Kirby Smart would be losing his mind right now, pissed at Jeff Lebby. But Kirby Smart gets away with it because he's won a title. He is everything that's wrong with coaches. He wins, so that's all that matters. I don't care. You have failed at the number one responsibility of a coach. What's more important than winning? What's more important than everything? Because it trumps everything when it comes to winning. Is do you have a passion for developing young men? And I don't think Kirby Smart gives two rips about developing young men beyond I'm going to develop to the point where I need them to help me win football games. You do not have the culture at Georgia with all the arrests. They had a kid pass away because of it, and then they had multiple kids. They've still getting kids arrested for speeding, even after one of their teammates died 2 years ago, which is terrible. And so, but you know what? But he wins games. All right, cool. I would love it if Kirby Smart's graduation rate sniffed his win percentage, but it doesn't. He has a 40-something% graduation rate right now. That's failure. But nobody cares because, well, who cares if these kids, and let's be honest, a lot of his players look a certain way that nobody cares about outside of their athletic ability. I think y'all know where I'm going with that one. So who cares if they only graduate 40-something% of those players? Who cares? They are winning championships. All right, cool. That kids are going to get no degrees. You're not challenging them at all. You're not developing the young people. They're leaving with criminal records. They're not leaving with a degree. You have a quarterback who played 6 years or 7 years for you, doesn't have a diploma from your school, and he's pretty much failed out of the NFL. Cool. You prepared him for what? But he's got a ring. It's like that guy. You guys remember that scene from Varsity Blues? We're at that party, and there's like that old dude that like graduated 15 years ago, and he's still at the party with his Letterman jacket on. That's what Georgia's producing in a lot of instances because he doesn't care. And I know he doesn't care because of his actions. Because if he cared, he'd have a completely different reaction to what's going on in his program. Very different reaction. And in my opinion, he should be suspended for a game. 100%. You put your hands on a player, and it wasn't a bump. It was a shove. Whether he thought it was the kid or not, whether he knew it was a kid or a player, doesn't matter. You can't do that. If a player would have shoved him that same way, he would have lost his mind because he's an emotional train wreck. Because he's a grown man who has no control over his emotions in the middle of a football game. Him and Will Muschamps and all those clowns like that just act like complete morons in a football game. It's okay because it's football. I don't care if it's football. You're acting like an idiot. I'm not talking about yelling. I'm not talking about getting in guys' faces. I'm talking about you're acting like an insane person right now. You have no control over your emotions in this minute. That's not what a leader should do. Abby wins championships. Okay, if that's your only takeaway, then I think you've missed what this is supposed to be about. And I've been consistent about this for years. And this is one of the reasons I disliked Brian Kelly a great deal. If your number one priority is not taking pride in the type of young men you're developing to send into the world as husbands, as fathers, as employees, as employers, as having an impact on society outside of sports, then you have failed. I don't care what your win-loss record is now. Do I also care about your win-loss record? I do. but not at the expense of that. It's why I despise Brian Kelly. It's why I despise Urban Meyer. It's why I despise Kirby Smart and all people like him, because I don't care about what type of young people I'm developing as long as we win. And that disgusts me. If you want to be that type of person, go coach in the NFL. But you know why those guys never go to the NFL? Because they can't bully professional athletes the way they bully college players. And you know why Georgia's going to eventually fail? It's because these kids are going to go to Georgia, and now they have an out. You're going to get in my face and go at me like that? Screw you. I'm going over here for more money. I'm not going to have a coach in my face spitting on me, acting like an idiot. I'm not going to do that. You can't bully me anymore because I can leave. Now, I don't like that, but you're seeing a lot more. You know why their secondary sucks? Go look at all the highly ranked secondary players they've landed in the last few years that are gone for whatever reason. I don't have to put up with that anymore. I don't have to put up with you anymore. You're acting like a crazy person. You can't control your own emotions. You want me to control my emotions? You try first, head coach. So I can't stand people like that. And there's been too many coaches like that over the years that think they can bully people because they're the coach. And that's one of the regrets I have of my coaching careers. There were times where I felt like I got too close to that line, to be honest with you, because I thought that's what coaches do. And I quickly learned that's not what coaching is. That's not what coaching is. That's not at all what coaching is. Coaching is when you have a kid come back and tell you 20 years later, hey, man, I'm doing this, and this is a true story. He wasn't even my position player. It's my second year as a coach. Kid's a dentist now, and I don't even remember this conversation. I remember talking with him in the cafeteria, but I don't remember this specific part of it. And they, coach, man, like, I'm a dentist now, and I was actually thinking about not doing this anymore. And the conversation we had really impacted me, and it did this. And I'm like, man, that's why you do it. And I said to my players my whole career, hey, look, 20 years from now, when we come back, we got our national championship rings. And yes, I have a national championship ring. And we got our conference championship rings. And I've won 4 conference championships as an assistant coach. And we talk about your All-American season, and I've coached 3 All-Americans. And we talk about your All-Conference season. I've coached 10 All-Conference players. You know what I'm going to care a lot more about than all of that? Are you a good husband? Are you a good father? Do you raise your kids the right way? Do you care about your kids? Are you in your home with your children being a father? No, you're not. Well, but you had that great season. I don't care that 10 years ago you were a great wide receiver. You're a bad father. You're a bad husband. That's all that matters. I failed you. Yeah, coach, but we won a championship. I failed you. And you have too many coaches that don't care about that. They just care about winning. And we have too many fans that don't care about that. Well, who cares if these young black kids aren't getting generated? They're playing football. That's all we care about. As long as they can't help us with football, we don't care anymore. Who cares if they don't go to class? We don't need them to go. We don't need them to know how to read and write. Who cares? They're great football players. I'm entertained. That's sad. And the fact that the media doesn't hold these people accountable, it's a sad state of affairs in our country. I'm not going to be that way. I don't care who dislikes me. I don't care who downvotes this podcast. I don't care what moron fan from another team jumps into the DMs and dumps in the chats and says stupid things. I don't care, because you're showing your butt when you come at me that way. But he's got this many wins. You're just jealous because you don't have rings. No, I'm not jealous at all, because I can lay my head down at night and know when I look back on my career, I did the best I could to develop young men. I failed at times. But I have a passion for that. I understood that. That's all that matters. And when this clown is out here acting the way he does, and he gets a pass from the national media, why? Because he's in the SEC. Kirby Smart's got championship rings. I don't care. He's not a good person. And if you're not developing young people, then what are we doing this for? What are we doing this for? Why are we doing this? Could you imagine the reaction if Niall Ivey had a 40-something% graduation rate for women's basketball? She'd get crushed. Could you imagine if Niall Ivey destroyed her basketball players the way that Kirby Smart does his? She'd get crushed. Why? Because it's not the same. It's not viewed the same. It's not this national brand, and all we care about is championships and going to the. They're going to go to the WNBA and make life-changing money. We don't care. It's a different sport. We don't care. But for football coaches, we'll allow it. Win. Just win, baby. Just win. It disgusts me. Kirby Smart disgusts me. He always has. I've told you this for years. This isn't new, guys. I've always disliked that man. He's dishonest. He's a cheater. He doesn't care about his kids. He doesn't, I mean, if he did, he'd change the way the programs run. He would. But he doesn't because he doesn't care. It's winning. And that's why I root for Georgia to lose all the time. All the time. And I hope the players see it. I hope players see through him and say, no, I'm not going to play for that guy. I'm not going to play for that guy. Because that guy doesn't care about me. If I stop being value of him as a football player, he doesn't care about me. I'm not playing for that guy. And, that's my rant. So, yeah, that's gonna be interesting feedback, but we'll have to see. But yeah, thank you for the question, Andrew. And then last super chat from Go Irish. Thank you for yours as well. The AP is just lining up ranked teams for the SEC and Big Ten. Period. I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, how do you have SEC and ACC teams with a loss? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 SEC schools or Big Ten schools with a loss ranked ahead of the best team in the Big 12. You have 2 teams with a loss, one in the Big 10, one in the Big 12, ranked ahead of the highest ranked ACC team, undefeated ACC team. Why? Because it's all about the perceived notion of the ACC and the SEC. And I do this every year. I give you stats about this and that, and it doesn't matter because the perception, we've become a society where perception has really become reality. And we throughout time, you always have a perception of something, but we at least used to have the ability to say, look, this is my opinion, but if the data, if I do research, if I get new facts of this, of that, I'm willing to change my opinion. Now it's like, nope, SEC is the best conference in football. Okay, but this is their record out of conference. It doesn't matter. It's best conference. Okay, but this is what happened here. Doesn't matter. It's best conference. Okay, so you're just going to kind of live in this world of best conference no matter what the evidence shows. Yep, that's what I'm going to tell you. It's as fans, we sit there and say, we'll justify something that our team does and then get mad at the other team when they do the same thing, right? I mean, let Ohio State get busted for having a coach stealing signs, and the whole tune from Ohio State fans will completely change. Oh, it's not that big a deal. And they'll start sounding just like Michigan fans. That's just because we are a very shallow group of people when it comes a lot of us when it comes to sports and politics and things like that, and we just kind of get in our tribes, and we're going to protect our tribe at all costs, even if we have to accept things that we know deep down are just nonsense and not true, but we're still going to protect our tribe. And that's kind of where we're at. So anyway, that's my rant on that. That's my take on that. So I appreciate your super chat. Full life with another super chat. No question. Going to the Tech game Saturday. Go Irish and IB Nation. I'll be there. So I'm flying down. I leave Friday. So I'll be down there this weekend for the game. I'm not doing any tailgate. People asked about that. I won't be doing any kind of tailgate. But if you are doing a tailgate, let me know, and I will do my best to try and stop by. But and if you guys organize any kind of like Friday night or Saturday morning hangout, something like that, I'll try to do the best I can to kind of get out and see you guys. So let me know, and then always look me up. If you guys ever see me walking around, I always have my IB stuff at grocery store, whatever. Don't hesitate to stop me and say hi. I know some people have said, I saw you, but I didn't want to say anything, and I always appreciate that. I mean, you guys are the reason why I'm able to do what I do. So if you ever want to see me and talk and say hi, please feel free. I appreciate that very much. You guys have a great rest of your night. Hey, on the way out, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and appreciate y'all being with us. Tommy, I'm not intimidating. You've actually come up, talk to me, so I know that I'm not intimidating at all. But really appreciate y'all being with me tonight. Really appreciate y'all with the great questions and the great super chats, and we'll be back. We might start a new segment this week, which I don't want to say too much about because we haven't figured out the details yet. But Sean Davis and I are thinking about adding a new night show once a week to the mix. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like yet, but keep an eye out for that. But that's why you need to make sure you've hit that notification bell. So when we do go live, It'll give you a heads up. Hey, IB's about to go live. Let's get after it. And we'll see you guys there. So hit like, subscribe, notifications, 5-star review, and of course, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Thanks for being with me tonight, folks, and I'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.